Good evening and welcome to the Thursday, October 25th, 2012 Planning and Zoning Commission meeting. We're going to begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. And Jens, would you please lead us in that? I don't know, I just liked it.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well done. The second item on our agenda tonight is the approval of the minutes from our October 11th, 2012 meeting. Is there any discussion about that?
Yes. Staff was going to go back and revisit page 13, section 7, part 2, and I wanted to know what kind of revisions have been made.
Actually, we went back and we talked to the State Department of Emergency Management, and we were able to take out that wording. I can't remember what the wording was now. It was something to the effect that any decision will be construed to the advantage, liberally construed in favor of the governing body. That has been taken out. And there were a couple of other things too, and we're able to make those changes. So actually this is going to the Board of County Commissioners on November 6th with the changes that you recommended.
What was it changed with?
The liberally construed was just eliminated.
It's just, so that's all you did is just eliminated that?
Right.
And, all right.
Any other comments? Do I have a motion to approve?
Second.
Did you get that, Tripson Bragnano? Correct.
Doesn't make a difference.
A dual.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay. Item number 3 is 3 public hearings that we have this evening. Do we need to ask about ex parte communication for public hearings?
No.
Okay, we do not. And can we swear everybody in for all 3 of them just once at the beginning? Anybody who intends to speak?
It's not necessary in a legislative public hearing, no,
Okay,
sir.
perfect. So the first one is a consideration of amendments to the LDRs, chapters 904 and 917, to allow use of an accessory structure serving a principal structure damaged or destroyed by a disaster. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Mr. Bowling.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for the record, Stan Bowling, County Planning Director. This is the first of LDR, Land Development Regulation Amendments. This first hearing is with respect to some accessory structure regulations in chapters 904 and 917. This amendment itself is the result of a current code case. The property owner is represented by attorney Gene O'Neill, who appeared before the Board of County Commissioners and requested that our existing accessory structures regulations be considered for an amendment as a result of his client's case. Just as a brief summary, his client's case is such that had a principal dwelling unit and a detached garage on his property. The hurricanes in 2004 destroyed the principal structure, but not the detached garage. So he had an accessory structure on the site with no principal structure. And I'll explain in a moment what our existing regulations have to do with that. But one of the proposals to resolve the code case is to actually initiate this LDR amendment. And the code case is essentially on hold pending action on this LDR amendment. If it is adopted, there won't be a compliance issue. Accessory structures are defined in our code, and this is common in most local governments. There are structures that serve and are subordinate to principal structures or uses. For example, a principal structure on a single-family lot would be a single-family home, and there could then be accessory structures that are subordinate to and serve the single-family home, such as a detached garage or a pool with a cabana and a shed. Those would be typical types of accessory structures. Generally, the way that our regulations are structured, where an accessory structure it stands alone, it's not allowed, it's considered out of context, and the actual character of the use changes. And an example would be if you had a neighborhood of single-family homes, and on an otherwise vacant lot there was just a pool constructed, and the use of that pool would not be in the context of a home. wouldn't have essentially surveillance of the homeowner and so forth there. Our existing regulations require that a principal use or structure be in place and remain in place for there to be an accessory structure. And that just kind of makes sense that since the accessory structure serves the principal structure has to be in place. We do have an existing exception to that in our code, and that's for waterfront docks on single-family waterfront properties, where an owner can come in and get approval and build a dock for up to 3 years prior to construction of the house. And that was put in place a number of years ago, and it's still in place. It hasn't been used that often, but it does get used from time to time, and it really allows an applicant to go through a pretty rigorous regulatory agency process to get approval outside of the county for a waterfront dock. The proposal is to add an exception where a principal structure is damaged or destroyed by disaster, and that was the case with Mr. O'Neill's client. The proposed amendment, we really looked at two types of disasters, essentially, that can render. It is rare that it happens, but it can happen that a principal structure is damaged or destroyed, and the accessory structure stands. And what we've set up in the proposed ordinance are timeframes for rebuilding the principal structure. The overall concept here is that an accessory structure can be allowed to stand for an amount of time, but not an indefinite amount of time. Within that time frame, either the principal structure needs to be rebuilt, or it is possible that the accessory structure could actually then be converted and turned into a principal structure. That could happen, for instance, with a detached garage. The way that the ordinance is, as proposed, is broken down, there is a 3-year rebuilding time frame for what we would call an individual catastrophic event, such as a house fire. And in that situation, let's say a house catches fire, it's damaged, it needs to be repaired, rebuilt, there's a detached garage, the owner can continue to use the detached garage, and that actually might aid in rebuilding the principal structure. We do not now in our code address this situation, but by practice, the rare circumstances when this sort of thing has happened, staff has issued permits for rebuilding the principal structure and allowed things to proceed. There is also in the proposed ordinance a 5-year time frame proposed for a declared disaster, a disaster declared by the governor or the president, such as a hurricane, such as the 2004 hurricanes. And the reason a longer time frame is given for those situations is, the experience has been that you can have a long recovery period for that scale of a disaster, and that could affect individuals. It could take longer to settle insurance. It could take longer to get contractors and get things rebuilt. So a longer time frame is proposed for that. There's also a provision in the code for, since we haven't addressed this situation yet, and we're just now addressing this situation with this LDR amendment, to set a time frame for situations like has occurred with Mr. O'Neill's client, where the damage has already occurred by a declared disaster, to start that 5-year time frame, to not go back in time, but to start now with it. Now actually being a little bit into the future here, January 31st, 2013 is what staff has proposed. That will give time for this proposed amendment to go through and to not have any kind of deadline or time frame near the holidays. That just doesn't tend to work real well. So we've proposed to set this at the end of January. There's also an extension option provided, and this was actually discussed a bit when Mr. O'Neill went before the Board of County Commissioners. And there may be reasons, or there may be a context or a specific reason in a specific situation where compatibility could be addressed, could be looked at, and an extension could be provided. So there is an extension clause for the Board of County Commissioners to hold a hearing, notice the neighbors, give them notice, and hold a hearing and review a request to extend the time frame. And again, there's some compatibility criteria with that. That's kind of just a summary of the amendment. Staff has worked with Mr. O'Neill, who's communicated with his client, and this is acceptable to staff, Mr. O'Neill, and his client. And staff's recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend the board adopt the proposed amendment to accessory structures regulations. I'd be glad to try to answer any questions that you might have.
Discussion, any questions?
I have a question. What's the definition of declared disaster? Is that something the federal government issues, or is that the state?
Either
Maybe
the
you want to
federal,
expand on that.
right,
within
either the federal
proposed-
government, the president, or the governor.
Okay.
Either one, and both are referenced in there.
Okay.
So it could be by either one. And it is an official declared
Okay. 'Cause
disaster.
there's- Yeah, okay.
In your summary on page 3, item 4, it says a process for the owner to request an extension of the 5-year timeframe. How long an extension? I mean, could this in reality go out 10 years?
That's not addressed. We didn't put a cap on how long the extension is. And for reasons that, the individual reason that the individual might come up with, there could be some other time frame. They could still be in some sort of dispute, for instance, to settle something. And so we didn't want to put a cap, foresee all circumstances in that case.
So that's open-ended and you'll decide it by a case-by-case basis?
Yeah, the board can take that sort of thing into account.
Okay.
How much time they need, is it a reasonable amount of, and what's the purpose, what's the reason for the request?
And in the case where an accessory structure becomes a principal structure, are all the timeframes the same for that?
Yes, in other words, the nonconformity of having the accessory structure there goes away because the accessory structure essentially is converted. So the entire issue goes away, but you're right, the time frame is to allow them to rebuild the principal structure. If they don't do that within the time frame, but essentially create a principal structure out of the accessory structure, that would work as well.
So that would have to be up to code?
That's
That would have to be
correct.
totally up to code, and they'd have that same time frame. They'd have
That's-
the 5-year time frame plus an extension if they come and request an extension?
That's correct.
Mr. Chairman. Stan, one question. Do you foresee just one extension request? You have an extension. Or would you foresee people coming back for a second extension?
People wouldn't surprise me at all. For
Eloquently
any
stated,
number,
sir.
having raised children and being
public
essentially a
servant.
child myself, I see it all the time. I think if we ever got to that, we could just as easily amend the ordinance. It is conceivable, but you want to bring this to an end. This is a nonconformity. I think the timeframes are pretty generous enough that a good faith effort could make it so. Staff did not foresee multiple extensions.
But here we are dealing with a hurricane that happened in 2004 and
Yes.
2012.
Yes.
So following on what Dr. Day said, I would recommend, or I put up for discussion, some kind of idea that, there's some kind of language in there that says, in the absence of compelling evidence, to the contrary, a requested extension shall not exceed 3 years, so that there's some expectation of what it's going to be, but you can certainly petition, and if it's a compelling argument, it can be otherwise. I think, the county doesn't want to be taking a case-by-case basis and someone say, well, you did it for this guy, not for this guy. I think we should have a 3-year thing. And if someone wants to get up and say, look, I have a really good reason, then
Depends
great.
if it's an election year or not. Stan.
Well, that's a really good reason. The other thing I had a question about specific to all of this, because I think this is obviously a good idea, but when someone's house is destroyed in a hurricane, and any number of things can happen, it could be a best case scenario. I don't know the particulars of this case, and I assume it is. But it'd also be a case where someone doesn't maintain the accessory structures. It can also be a case where there's a pool and we have a life safety issue because it's not, encircled with the proper. I mean, are those things otherwise covered in code enforcement? And that wouldn't. Okay, so they
Yes.
are. So we don't need to add
Yeah.
anything to this ordinance to cover those issues.
Right, unsafe situations are handled elsewhere.
Okay.
Yes.
And that helps me.
And Mr. Chairman, you're suggesting in the code to put in, with the extension option, a 3-year time frame unless there's some other.
I think you
compelling
said
reason.
not to exceed. I don't think you want to, I think if the commissioner's saying, the guy only needs a year, that's fine, but I think you want to put a cap on it.
Yeah, I want to say, in the absence of
I think you've
compelling
got it.
evidence to the contrary, the request for extension shall not exceed 3 years. You guys can
And that's
figure out
a-
the language.
That's generous.
Very generous.
And that's contemplating one extension, a total extension of no more than 3 years.
Yeah, but remember, they get to go in front if they have a really good reason why.
Or
It's not
come
good.
back and amend the ordinance.
You can always throw yourself on the mercy of the court.
Do it.
But Dr. Day had a great point there.
I agree, because I could easily see this going 15 years.
Yeah.
I could easily see that, and I don't think we want that.
Someone want to formulate a motion out of that?
Public hearing.
No, it's a public hearing. Anybody, I'm sorry, it's a public hearing. Anyone who wishes to speak, now's the time. I'm opening up the public hearing. Nobody? Okay.
I'd move approval with the accepted amendment of an additional 3 years on the exception. Staff's
Second.
recommendation with that change.
Any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No. Okay, very good. The second public hearing under item number 3 is McDonald Corporation's request to amend the Land Development Regulations, Chapters 911 and 956, to modify the non-conforming freestanding sign regulations in the Roseland corridor, Roseland and other corridors. You want to explain that to us, please?
I'll try. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This request is from McDonald's Corporation, and it does involve Chapters 911 and 956, 956 being signs, 911 containing the regulations for other corridors, mostly along the US 1 and other major roadways, and the Roseland corridor. The amendment is the result of current renovation projects for South US 1 and Roseland McDonald's locations, both locations in both parts of the county. McDonald's desires to renovate buildings and modified drive-through facilities at each of the stores, but not replace freestanding pole signs at this time. And those freestanding pole signs are taller than the 10-foot height that's the current corridor requirements regulate and require. And they're also not monument style signs. And in this case, they're pretty substantial structures. And again, McDonald's is basically focusing on the buildings and the drive-through areas. The existing corridor regulations have triggers that require bringing a freestanding sign or a non-conforming freestanding sign up to code. Again, monument style and 10 feet tall. One is essentially a 50% rule for repairs and renovations to the sign. And the other, another trigger is replacing the sign. If they take the sign down, the replacement sign must conform. And there's also a trigger for major renovations to the building, where a property in the corridor is required to upgrade to what's called a compatible property. And to bring a site up to compatible property, there are essentially 4 components. One is bring the roadway buffer, in this case, for instance, along US 1, up to the corridor landscape plan. Renovations to the building have to be such that the building color has to conform, either new colors or the old non-conforming colors be made to meet the new color standards. Facade signs, which are always attached to the building. So again, those first 3 dealing with the front buffer, and these 2 with the building itself, and the freestanding sign in the current regulations has to be brought up to the current code. McDonald's position is that the first 3 upgrades, the landscaping upgrade, the building facade, building color, that's reasonable to tie to a major building renovation. The freestanding sign is a separate structure from the building. It has its own replacement and investment life cycle, different from kind of the cycles and renovation cycles that go through for the building itself. And their position is that it's reasonable to upgrade the pole sign base and do all those other types of compatible upgrades before kicking in a trigger to completely replace the sign. Staff agrees with the approach of decoupling the building renovation and the freestanding sign replacement if the bases are upgraded in terms of their appearance, and the other replacement triggers remain in place. And the proposed amendment focuses, again, just on the freestanding sign provision and primarily affects US 1 commercial properties. That's actually the corridor that has the most non-conforming freestanding signs. In fact, in Roseland, it's the only place in the Roseland corridor where there are non-conforming freestanding signs. The proposed amendment modifies the definition of compatible property, retains the roadway buffer upgrade requirement, the building color and facade sign, but as proposed would no longer include the freestanding pole sign to be upgraded if it's screened by landscaping or a decorative base. Not uncommon to have the decorative base as an upgrade. It kind of gets it halfway there, so to speak, to a monument style. The proposed amendment adds flexibility also, and this was staff's kind of input into the amendment, to allow freestanding sign height to be the grade of the adjacent parking area or the street, whichever is higher. We've done that with some of the landscape requirements already in the corridors, and we think that flexibility is probably a good thing to give to property owners. It may make a difference of a foot or so, but it makes a difference in terms of being able to see the sign from the roadway. And so that's appropriate. And so that's also part of the amendments, and the applicant agreed to that being added to what they've proposed. Staff's recommendation is that the Planning and Zoning Commission recommend the board adopt the proposed amendment to freestanding signs in the Roseland and other corridors, and I'd be glad to answer questions that you might have.
Thank you, Stan. Any questions?
Was the South US 1 McDonald's that we're talking about, was that built about 93?
That's probably a good guess. I would have said early 90s.
And when it was built, the freestanding sign was within code at that time.
That's
when
correct.
It was built.
That's correct.
And so it amazes me that these freestanding signs will probably last forever, where the buildings themselves will probably be modified a couple of times.
I think that's possible. I mean, I think the McDonald's representative is here, and in case of McDonald's, those particular signs are pretty significant structures. I believe the code at the time was a 25-foot height limit, and I think that's probably what they are at in both locations. There are other types of non-conforming signs that are out there that won't have a life that long, a structural life that long, but those probably are substantial structures.
So by this process, we're meeting it, there's going to be an improvement in that freestanding sign through this process.
Right, through what's proposed, the change to the freestanding sign will be more landscaping around the base of it or a decorative base, so there'll be kind of an aesthetic upgrade, but the sign can still remain at, for instance, 25 feet, and there'll be exposed pole.
Yeah, here's my view on this. I wasn't around when it was put into the code, the policy, that we were going to have a corridor plan that was going to make all of the signage in these corridors revert to something we thought was better looking than some of the older signs there. And I'm not interested in relitigating that. That is now the policy of the county. It's as simple as that, good or bad, agree or not. What I do know, and what my experience as a developer in this type of development tells me, is that these signs are extremely valuable. Extremely valuable. These large signs mean a lot to the restaurant. And common sense tells me that because that is so, that the two remaining triggers, which is the 50% rule of a renovation, which you'd never know about unless they came in and asked for a permit, which they would never do because they'd never want to lose their sign, or the idea that they're going to replace the sign. Well, heck, they're never going to replace the sign. That's very, very valuable to them. I just don't think that sign will ever come down. I think they would go out and maintain that thing forever. I mean, that's what I would do. I would maintain it forever. So I would simply say to you that if it is the desire, and if it is indeed the policy, and if it's a wise policy of the county for these things to eventually expire, this change will not will not lead to that result. So on the other hand, I believe that I do understand the idea that a large investment, dollar investment in a sign needs to be amortized over a certain number of years. And I don't think we want to be coercive, and particularly not in the current economic environment, I think. So I can imagine that we would have some kind of rule that they could do the renovation and they could ask for a one-time exemption from having to do it. But I think in asking for the exemption, it starts the clock on a 5 or a 10-year thing where at the end of that time, no matter what, they're going to do it. Otherwise, we'll never get rid of these signs. I don't mind giving them, I don't mind saying, okay, we'll give you another 5 years. You're doing a major renovation. This sign's not ready to be taken out of service yet. It's got a good life cycle left. But we got to have some point at which our policy is actually being met. maybe there's another more clever way to do it, but I've thought about this, and, you know, I'd like to hear other ideas about how we can eventually reach our policy goal. But the other two things, we're never going to meet them. These signs are too valuable to these vendors. If I owned them, I would never let those go. They're great. And frankly, it's a little unfair to people who are going in later, you know, because they're never coming down. That's my thoughts.
Did you all look at did you look at a time frame like he's talking about? And, you know, I'm surprised I don't see Gene here tonight, because he's been at every one of these for the last 15 years when we talked about modifying all these corridors.
Sure. Yeah, a couple of things. One, I'll address that. Gene Waddell's been a great advocate, been involved with the State Road 60 corridor from way back. This issue does not affect that corridor, because that corridor had, well, first of all...
No, I understand, but we brought in US 1, we brought in after the fact, we brought in
others.
Some major other corridors. Oslo is another one.
Yes, that's correct.
I just was, you know, I had mixed emotions about it having been in the beginning, but because I think that if you're going to make the move, you need to make the move. But I understand that there's certainly a distance in sales value as well as the cost of the sign, but I don't... At what time, I mean, is there a point in time when that could be mitigated?
Two things. One is just, and you may recall, a couple years ago, we had an amortization requirement in the other corridors. And again, because the other corridors in Roseland focuses, or most Roseland corridor focuses along US 1, the number of non-conforming signs, you know, we picked a date 5 years after that corridor went into effect that you have to do one of two things. You have to either replace the sign and make it a 10-foot monument style sign, or if the cost of doing that exceeded 50% of the value of the sign, you could landscape around the base or do the decorative base and at least give it an aesthetic upgrade. We went to the board, because that trigger was 2010. We went to the board in 2010 and said, you know, because of the economy, a lot of deadlines have been put off. Do you want to put the deadline further out when hopefully the economy
and
recovers?
Frankly, it was a little bit of a heavy-handed coercive policy.
A 5-year amortization. And what the board said, no, we don't want to extend that. We want to do away with that requirement altogether. And that's what happened. That amortization, that, again, corridor-wide amortization requirement went away. I think amortization requirement, I mean, makes sense. What you've suggested is essentially start that on a site-by-site basis. When they come in with a major renovation, then you have 5 or 10 years to, you know, finish out the life cycle of the freestanding sign. I mean, that's certainly an approach that could be worked with. Again, this isn't actually staff's or the county's LDR amendment. Obviously, we want to hear from the applicant on that.
What's the number of non-conforming signs?
Along US 1, the entire length of the county, it was over 100. I'm believing it was around 100. Well, I think it was 117 when we did the count back in 2010.
And what you're saying, Sam, is that 100's going to stay the same 10 years from now, just based on the economics and replacing that sign?
I'm saying, it's my point of view that just coming in and saying in 5 years everybody has to do this, I don't like the idea of that. I don't think that's right. But when someone comes in and does a major renovation, you know, which US 1 is improving, you know, it's improving. I think that's an appropriate time to do it. However, I can imagine a circumstance, an economic circumstance, where this sign isn't that old, you know, it's a $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 sign, you know, and plus it's going to cost $15,000 to do this monument sign, you know, that's nonsensical in a certain sense. So, okay, so we're going to ask for a waiver from that requirement, but that starts the clock ticking on, you know, at some point, reasonable point in the future, time's up. You are going to take down that sign, and you are going to be in compliance, and you are going to be on a level playing field with all of your,
you've got a fairness issue in the sense that if you got 3 other people that are new and renovated, they've got monument signs, and you're the one guy that's got the sign up in the air, you know, who sees who first. And,
absolutely.
And it's very valuable.
And I think that, I mean, I like the idea of it may take, I don't know whether it's 5 or 10 years. I mean, 5 years after your renovation is certainly reasonable to me, but I'm not the guy involved in this. So, but I don't know. I prefer that to landscaping, and into future sometime we would be doing that. I tend to agree with that.
Or you just might need to look into the average lifespan of a typical McDonald's sign. Because like you said, it's a big investment, and how long do they really last before they actually have to replace the sign?
They pride themselves on some from what, the 40s and 50s?
I don't
Like all of our
know.
systems are
That's
still
why
there.
we have the
So, I
applicant
mean,
here,
I
we
don't-
can
yeah.
ask those questions.
I guess what I'm saying is, in my experience, a sign that's a large sign on US 1, that's grandfathered in, would be well worth whatever the annual expense is to make sure that that thing never comes down. So I don't think that either of the other triggers, as a practical matter, would ever be reached unless we put in some kind of...
Hit by a tornado.
Sure,
end
it's
of-
increased visibility.
It's got to end at some point.
Maybe, let's hear from the applicant.
Yeah. Could we do that? Let's hear from the applicant.
Yeah, we can open it up as a public hearing. Anybody that wishes to speak, come on up, and maybe we can hear from the McDonald's representative first. Hi, good evening. Would you state your name and address for the record, please?
Absolutely. Kim Binkley, Sire with the Sire Group, 7321 Merchant Court, Sarasota.
Thank you.
So, well, okay, at least you all are familiar with McDonald's. So that's a good place to start, okay? Hopefully you went there before tonight. A couple points is, one, the saying that a sign never comes down, I can painfully tell you exact locations right now where signs are having to come down. The signs are very, very important, not only to McDonald's, but you know what? Ask Wendy's, ask Burger King, ask the fast food industry. The signs have been very important. How long the sign lasts, I'm learning, depends on how good was your welder. How well did they do the sign installation? Your code on non-conforming signs has a 50% rule. You'd be surprised how fast on a pole for a 25-foot sign you can meet that 50% cost. If you didn't really get on top of that, the technology exists today where you can do some preventive maintenance, but for a long time that technology hasn't been there to know what's going on the inside of that pole. McDonald's does inspect their poles annually to make sure that they are safe. So this issue is coming up time after time. In all the cities and counties that we've been working on, having the dates and the codes have presented problems in that, you've got to kind of enforce it to everyone kind of thing if you're putting in an improvisation date or what have you. So these two sites were actually built in 87 and 89, or 83 and 85. Yeah, one is 89 and the other one is 87. Roseland is 87. And the reinvestments in the building, and particularly if you look at the economy we've been in, McDonald's has taken a big risk, and they have tried to focus on the down economy and to reinvest into the restaurants. And those reinvestments have been an important part of it, and it's a dramatic reinvestment. It's a very different look. A lot of the telltale of the red tile that people used to get used to seeing and what have you, you would be really surprised how many people will say they're driving by it because the red tile wasn't there, and that was kind of their back indicator to get into the turn lane to make the safe turn. It turns out that for McDonald's especially, their customers seem to be a little bit more impulsive. We found that in Mulberry, people are sitting at home in the lazy chair and decide to load up the family and go to McDonald's. For the broad spectrum customer, it's a lot of, I'm on the road anyway, I'm going to swing through there, I'm going to get something. Most people get the exact same thing every time that they go. So what we're doing is implementing what we think is a bold new look. We think it is an attractive look and a more modernized look, trying to show reinvestment. The base of the signs and what have you have been a very common resolution that we've come with a lot of cities and counties. And those have varied on where is the height state. Think about where you've got a stone front, you put the matching stone in. Sometimes that might be 8 feet, sometimes it might be 10 feet. It really depends on what the site specific is. So basically what you're almost doing is camouflaging that pole aspect of it. So that's where that came from, because that has been so well received in so many places. But the signage is important, and quite honestly, the losing the sign becomes, not just for McDonald's, but when any restaurant is looking at it this time when it's so competitive, you have to look at, does it become a big deterrent that you're better off to keep, your old tired building and keep the sign because when you lose that, you're going to see such a drop in business, because that sign, it does generate a lot of traffic. McDonald's has a higher, normally for fast food, 38% is impulse. McDonald's is actually more around 60% impulse, where they see the sign and then they start to make the turn maneuvers to get into the correct lane to get in there. So the amortization is not something we have discussed with McDonald's. It has not been something that we've done throughout the state of Florida and all the many, many cities and counties that we've been working on. I will tell you that in the city of Tampa, they're actually working on an ordinance right now where in the city of Tampa, if you're not changing the sign, you don't lose the sign, but they're actually modifying their code where even the signs that are grandfathered in, they're going to allow electronic message centers to be placed in those signs and still fall under the non-conforming sign status. So they're actually working on that language now. But the signage has been a big issue in a lot of cities and counties, and the Manatee County took out their 50% rule, and they actually started making their signage go more on what's the speed in front of it, what kind of traffic is on it, is it more of a residential area, is it more of a highway area, and they've made theirs more specific to what's the traffic moving down the road. Alachua County just did a major code rewrite in which they had a number of things that they changed, and they are watching your language. They've got one more thing to change, and this would be, they were going to look at your language, but they've gone ahead and changed an enormous amount of their part of it. For the most part, I almost call it the divorcing of the building and the sign. That is more of what you see in Hillsborough County, in the city of Tampa, in Sarasota County, you can kind of go up and down and all over the state. The monument signs have tended to be regulated in more residential, where you've got a closer residential type district, not necessarily on major corridors, where the traffic is moving at a little bit faster speed, where you've got a lot more truck traffic, a lot more business traffic going on, and that's where those pole signs have really, really been important. US 1 is a great example of that. They are, your business corridors.
But you understand what I said at first, that we're not here to relitigate the wisdom of what our policy is. I mean, our policy is that we want these corridors to have monument signs and not policy. I mean, that's already been determined in Indian River County. I hear you saying what everybody else is doing and everyone else, and maybe we do need to revisit that entire thing, but that's not what we're doing tonight. What we're doing tonight is making an amendment to our existing policy to give an exception to it. But what I'm suggesting, and you tell me, I do believe that it could be maintained and kept below the 50% rule forever. I don't know how, as a practical matter, the county would ever really know. If you were spending 52% or 54%, I don't think anybody would self-regulate that, frankly, because you yourself are up here telling me how valuable those signs are, and I know they are. I know they're very valuable, and I know why they're valuable to you, and I understand that. But at some point, either we have a policy or we don't have a policy about what we want our signage to be out there. You're asking us to change our policy, and I think it's maybe a reasonable change, but at some point we have to have the result we want. You're trying to update your look for McDonald's. We're trying to update our look for US 1.
Well, one of the ways that you would know about the sign is when those poles are replaced, if those poles fail, you have to get a permit to replace that pole. You can't, if you change a face, that is considered a very minor thing, and I think there's usually even a small permit for that. But when you start replacing the pole, and I'll be quite honest, that's usually your trigger, is the poles fail.
They're 25 years old now.
The poles are...
Remember you said it was built in 1987?
Yes. So
they're 25 years old
so
now.
the life of the pole truly depends on the quality of the welder at the installation. Because if the welder did a good job, if he did everything exactly the way he would, that's one thing. If he didn't, then that's when you're facing the rusting from the inside.
Okay. Well,
and so the only way to know about the quality of that is that McDonald's takes that very seriously, and they actually inspect their signs. As a matter of fact, we've had the city of Palmetto, we had a failed pole sign that we had to replace. In the city of St. Pete, we're working on a failed pole sign. So, that's an ongoing just consideration.
What's the average lifespan of the pole?
you know what, I can't give you a good answer on that. That's what I'm saying. I've really learned it depends on what was the quality of the workmanship and welding it together when it went up, because it really comes down to a lot of the rusting and how it's weathered on the inside.
George, did you?
I have a quick observation, and this is part of what is a little bit, I won't say troubling, but kind of bothers me about this. How many McDonald's do we have now here? There's at least, there's out by 95, there's Oslo, there's 2 on US 1, and if I'm not, don't they all have monument signs?
Some of the newer stores do have the monument signs.
I think this may be, I'm not sure, I think this one may be the only one. There may be one out by 95
Yeah,
that has
the one
some-
by 95 is
one
allowed
out
to
by
have
95, which is
taller.
not really on the quarter, it's offset, so it's got the height.
Right,
But the
they're-
others are all
yes, they're-
monument signs,
right.
so I'm, from the practical standpoint of what, like Sam's saying, with the policy, et cetera, we've kind of been down this road, even with McDonald's already, and frankly, I don't see a reason to make an exception.
When there is a new store built and it has started with the monument sign,
These are all remodels. There was one new store, which is a McDonald's owned store out on Oslo Road, and the others are privately franchised, and they've both been remodeled and have monument signs.
So you're saying, you're.
So I'm saying this,
you're not in
we've
favor
been
of any
down,
modification at all.
as much as that, I empathize and sympathize, we've got 100 and some odd signs down US 1 we're going to have to deal with. The idea was that when this was put in place, they thought it would upgrade the look in the county, and there was a reason for it. And unless there's a change to that policy, I don't see any reason to make an exception on this one any more than I do the others.
– 25 years is a pretty good life for a sign.
so is it your desire that that dates be issued for specific locations, that dates be issued for specific signs? Like, let's call it drop dates, that at that point in time.
Actually, I thought the policy was the remodeling was the trigger for the sign, with no date, frankly.
50% rule.
That's great. That's the existing regulation
Right,
for
which would mean,
compatibility.
we're really not talking about dates. And my opinion is you remodeled and you're faced with the fact that we have changed our rules and you have to bring yourself into conformity. Does that mean the sign would not be there tomorrow, much less 3 or 4 years from now? But if you're remodeling the site, you're remodeling the site, including the sign.
The only, I'm maybe more than half persuaded by what you're saying, but the only reason that I would say it might be worth considering otherwise is I am somewhat persuaded by the idea that the remodeling may be delayed or not done at all as a result of the loss of the value of that sign. Whereas if it's some point off still in the future, you know, that may take away that.
The only reason
That
I
could be a
bring
deal
up the
killer on
other
the remodel.
stores, and the only reason I bring it up is that within the city or the county, we've kind of been down the dance, and other people have already done this. And the Roseland corridor is not like US 1. US 1 is certainly a much heavier used corridor. I'm not sure the people in Roseland would think of Roseland so much as a heavy corridor as it is a street that leads into our area. I'm not sure we're thinking of it in the terms that you are, but the reality is other McDonald's have already done this when they remodel. So why should you be the exception in the McDonald's ground?
Well, the proposed language that we have would not apply just to McDonald's. It would apply to anyone that would fall under redevelopment in the corridor. So it would not apply just to McDonald's.
I understand. But I mean, other people have already conformed to this and have done what was necessary, so why should we make a change just for you in this one? Time side, understanding the sympathy, empathy, signage, et cetera. What would the others say? What happens? I mean, I don't understand the need for this now when we hadn't done it before.
Well, you know, Wendy's just announced their new rollout of what their new prototype may be. It may be that they would actually reinvest in their store that's in the same shopping center as we are.
Stan, have other people gone through this already and eliminated their sign as part of because they were doing a major renovation, and then so now they have to come in and there are other people who've already been subjected to that, who have already accepted this and this has happened?
Yeah, the two that I can think of that have happened, say in the last 5 years on US 1, one in North County and one in the South County, the signs that they replaced were not in good shape. It didn't look like, I mean, I didn't conduct an inspection. So one of them was the pole sign had been abandoned. It was just the frame and the pole left, and it looked rusted. So I think that could have had a structural component to it. The other one was a shorter sign, and is where Einstein Bagels went in. It was the Boys Donuts. It was about a 14-foot, 15-foot sign, and they changed that out and changed the way that whole look went with their. So those two that I can think of that met the compatible property requirement and changed out their freestanding sign.
And no negative feedback.
Oh, no, neither one wanted to do more than they could. The North County location, they realized they needed to replace the sign anyway. And there needed to be, on the Einsteins, they definitely needed to change the fate because it was a total rebranding of it. But it does involve electrical work as well as the structural.
What's the average cost for replacing one of these signs?
For
McDonald's.
For replacing it with a monument sign or
Yes.
replacing a full-size sign?
Replacing a full-size sign.
Replacing it with a monument sign, right?
Yes, that's correct. Excuse me. Yes.
And this is a guess on my part because on the monument signs, the cost of the electronic reader boards, which have become very popular, can play with that cost quite a bit. You're probably talking about, for the typical sign of that nature, about $30,000 for the monument signs.
I guess my only concern is this could potentially have some disincentive intentions and consequences associated with it. So that would be my only concern in adopting a pretty rigid and strict line that's already in place.
Well, we wouldn't be adopting it. We'd just be enforcing it.
Enforcing it. That's correct. Thanks, Sam.
The McDonald's on North US 1 in Vero Beach just went through a big renovation. Did they never have a pole sign, or what do they have now?
They have the benefit of being in the city of Vero Beach. So they have their own regulations, and I don't think that they had to totally replace their sign. I don't think they have a monument-style sign requirement in the city of Vero Beach.
The one in the shopping center up by the Wendy's?
No, the one up on US 1.
One on US
North.
North.
Yeah, north, yeah. So it's a pole sign?
I
believe.
I think they changed it.
I don't think the city has a monument-style requirement. I can't remember what the sign looks like.
We just have to decide whether we really want to have all the signs go down to, or not. I think that's it. And whether we want to have a little slippery room for it to be taken out a little while or not.
I think under there are two decisions. One is we have a proposal in front of us that we need to say yes or no to. If in the course of the discussion you want to send staff back, say you want to offer a 5-year amortizing period or whatever from the renovation to give you the slope that you were talking about, then that's certainly something the board we can offer. But that would not apply to anything. We can't modify this tonight.
Well, I think you could. They are the applicant. However, you make a recommendation to the board to adopt it, deny it, or adopt with modifications. So you can make a recommendation to adopt with modifications if you so choose.
Well, wouldn't it be cleaner with the way this is written to deny it and then turn around and have you all rewrite a different ordinance if that's what they want? So it's not. That would be my preference, but
I think you should make a recommendation to the board, and in terms of wordsmithing and all, certainly we, staff can do that. The applicant may have some ideas as well, but again, I guess you have an option to have it modified and brought back to you. But again, the applicants, brought this forward as their application. I would just recommend that you've got specific ideas and direction to go ahead and make a recommendation with whatever modifications you think the board should make.
I think we should just modify it and send it to the commission.
Modified how?
Yeah.
Basically, you're talking about some sort of sunset, correct? Some sort of amortization period, 5 years, 6 years, 7 years, I don't know. You guys were talking about 5.
Yeah, my issue is that when this place was built, the sign was in code. And so now it's not. And rather than just cut it out, I'd prefer to see us put a time limit on when it needs to be done.
That's kind of what we're saying, a 5-year sunset on it, or does anybody have any other suggestions besides that?
I would say no more than 5.
And that's after a major renovation of the
That would be correct.
facility.
After a
Yeah.
major renovation of the facility.
The exception would be then if they trigger the ordinance as it is written today, then the signage must be changed, but they're given a period of 5 or 7 years, whatever this, say 5 to 7 years. I'll say 5 for the argument's sake, but 5 to 7 years in order to make that change and put it in place, which puts the clock running on the sign based on the current law or the current ordinance that we have written. No further ado.
Can somebody turn that into a motion?
Mr. Chairman, Stan, how many signs in the Roseland corridor are currently non-conforming?
The only signs in the Roseland corridor not conforming are along US 1. I think it's about 7 or 8.
Okay.
It's a pretty short stretch of US 1 in the Roseland corridor.
I think 5 is good, because I think it gives the applicant a real hard choice to make, whether let's just do it now, or if it's really a good reason not to, then, then they'd put it off.
I mean, from a practical standpoint, and I understand the cost involved here, but if you're talking about taking down the sign and $30,000 over 5 years, and you're making a major renovation that's going to be considerably higher than that, I don't.
That sign's worth a lot.
Well, the sign's worth a lot with your description being because it's up in the air and it's high. What we're saying is that sign, it's got value, but that's a sales value, not a cost value. And that decision's already done. So I'll go along with 5 years, but that's about it for me.
Seems like a reasonable compromise to me as well.
Mr. Chairman, you still got the public hearing open. I don't know if anybody else wants to speak.
Would anybody else like to speak on this matter?
The applicant like that.
Would the applicant like to speak more on this matter?
I believe she spoke.
I'd like to make a suggestion, if I could. If
Please
you
do.
were going to tie it to a date, so of 5 years, so everybody's not trying to figure out from what date, I'd like to suggest after the renovation, there will be an updated notice of completion, or there probably wouldn't be a new CO issued, but there would be a document that basically says the work has been done. I think that just because it's so difficult to go back and try to figure out where people were then, that if you tie it to something that already happens in your process, like that certificate of completion,
That's fine.
That
She's
it-
right on timing. That's a good
Sensible.
idea.
that it would make it for your staff to be able to track a date for McDonald's or anyone else to track a date, it would make a lot more sense.
That's fine. That gives them an extra.
Everybody's nodding yes. Thank you.
Yes.
Any other comments from the public? Okay, so I'm going to put forth a motion. The motion is to...
You want to close the public hearing? I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
I'm going to close the public hearing. The motion is that we accept the modification with the condition that if the requirement is triggered that the sign be changed, and the applicant chooses not, and the applicant petitions for that not to occur at the time of the renovation, that beginning at the time of the certificate of completion, they have no more than 5 years to comply.
Second.
Discussion?
That was seconded by,
Todd.
Todd Brignano. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Let's move on to the next public hearing. The third public hearing tonight is Vero Estates Incorporated request for a small-scale comprehensive plan future land use map amendment to redesignate it plus or minus 9.98 acres from L2 to C1 and to rezone those acres from RM6 to CG.
It's me, Mr. Chairman.
Take it away.
Good evening. This is a proposed small-scale amendment and a rezoning, and in this case, the proposal is to redesignate 9.9 acres from L2, which is low-density residential 2, to commercial industrial, CI. And it's also to rezone the same property from RM6, which is residential multifamily, 6 units per acre, to CG, general commercial. And this is real unusual for us. We're recommending denial on this project. But let me start, give you a little background. First of all, I know you very often see standard comp plan amendments. This that you're seeing before you is a small-scale amendment. And small-scale amendments are different from standard amendments, first of all, because they're exempt from the twice-a-year requirement. They can be submitted at any time. They're not limited to January and July like standard amendments are. Small-scale amendments also go through a streamlined review process. They don't get sent to state and regional review agencies. They're actually approved just like a rezoning. After you make a recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners, the board holds a public hearing, and they can make a recommendation on the small-scale amendment. There are some criteria. Small-scale amendments have to be less than 10 acres, and they can't involve environmental lands. For those reasons, small-scale amendments have fewer potential impacts, and that's one of the reasons that they're exempt from the twice a year, and one of the reasons that they don't go to state and regional review agencies. The subject property is shown here in this aerial. It's on the northeast corner of 66th Avenue and County Road 510. You can see that the property is vacant right now, and it's surrounded on the north and east by single-family houses. Just to give you a locational context of where the property is, on this graphic you can see the subject property here in white. This is 66th Avenue running north and south, County Road 510 east and west. The gray area here is City of Sebastian corporate limits. To the east of the subject property, starting about 1/10 of a mile away, is the County Road, or is the 62nd Avenue County Road 510 commercial industrial node. And further east is the major node in the Wabasso area, which is the US 1 County Road 510 node. I also want to point out at the southwest corner of 66th Avenue and County Road 510 is the approved Liberty Park TND development project. And I just want to point out the commercial part of Liberty Park is at the northeast part of the project, and that's over 209,000 square feet that's already approved, already entitled at that intersection. Looking at the existing future land use map, you can see that the subject property and the properties to the north and the east have the same L2 land designation. The property to the west also has a residential land use designation. It's R, which is 1 unit per acre. Property to the south is L1, which is residential up to 3 units per acre. And the property to the southwest is actually designated ag in the comp plan, although that's where the Liberty Park TND is located. This is the proposed change to the future land use map. You can see that the applicant is proposing that the subject property would be commercial industrial, and as you can see, it's surrounded by residential land. The existing zoning pattern is very much like the future land use pattern. You can see both the subject property and the properties to the north and the east have an RM6 zoning designation. Property to the west and some of the property to the south is RS1, which is 1 unit per acre. Some of the property to the south is RM3, multifamily up to 3 units per acre. And on the south side of 510, on both the east and west sides of 66th Avenue, the zoning is PD TND, and that's for the Liberty Park TND project. This slide shows what the proposed zoning map would look like if the proposal were approved. It shows CG zoning adjacent to the surrounding RM6, RS1, and RM3 zoning. For this proposal, we analyzed it just as we would any other comp plan amendment and rezoning. We looked at concurrency, comprehensive plan consistency, environmental impact, and compatibility with the surrounding uses. What's different with this application is that the applicant submitted a 21-page analysis showing why he thought that the proposal is consistent with the comp plan and should be approved. And so we analyzed his analysis, and I will go over that to some extent tonight in the presentation. But first item that we looked at was concurrency. And at this stage in the overall development process, we don't look at concurrency in the detail that we look at if it's an actual development project like a site plan or a subdivision. At this case, at this point in time, we're doing a conditional concurrency analysis. It's a one point in time look at the concurrency facilities and whether or not the subject property would meet levels of service for those. The conditional concurrency certificate that an applicant gets at this time doesn't vest concurrency, and it doesn't reserve any capacity. This is just a one-time snapshot look. And a conditional concurrency certificate like this can be approved with specific conditions, and that's the case here. What we found when we did the concurrency analysis is for all of the concurrency facilities except traffic, there's sufficient capacity to accommodate the project at the highest intensity that it could be built out. There isn't with traffic. On County Road 510, we've got several links that are over capacity. But because of that, and because this is a conditional concurrency, it's a conditional concurrency analysis, we have already issued a conditional concurrency certificate with conditions. And the conditions are that prior to development on the project, County Road 510 needs to be 4-lane from County Road 512 to US 1, and the intersections of 510 US 1, 510 and 512, and 510 and 66 Avenue all need to be improved. And as to the timing of those improvements, prior to development, they either need to be constructed and in place, or under construction, or in the first 3 years of the county's 5-year capital improvement program. And as a matter of fact, the County Road 510 project is in the county's 5-year capital improvement program, but it's in years 4 and 5, and it's not completely funded. So right now, it is looked at as being on the horizon, and in the future, maybe the distant future, the county will be making those improvements. The next thing we looked at after concurrency was comp plan consistency. And as you know, we've got several hundred policies and objectives in the comp plan. And the policies in the plan are important for a couple of reasons. First of all, when the policies are implemented, that's how we're going to get the land use pattern and the type of community that we want. The second thing is the policies are in there to ensure that we make consistent decisions on land use matters, and we're not arbitrary in making those decisions. In this case, we did what we do with any comp plan amendment and rezoning. We evaluated the request against all applicable policies, and we found the proposal is not consistent with several policies. And I'll go over those in a minute, but specifically their policies 1.24, 1.25, 1.43, and 14.3, all the future land use element. Now, I want to emphasize at this point, we didn't just get a written application for a comp plan amendment and a rezoning. We met with the applicant several times beforehand. We told the applicant the proposal's not consistent with the policies of the plan, and we said, if you feel strongly about this, you should come in to amend the policies of the plan. And if the policies are amended, then it shouldn't be a problem. The map can be changed. But we said right now, the way the policies are, our position is that the proposed land use map change cannot be approved. So let me just briefly go into those policies and give you staff's position. The first policy is policy 1.24, and that says that a node can't be expanded unless it's at least 70% developed, and there are certain exceptions. Well, first of all, this proposal, this request does not meet the exceptions that are in policy 1.24. The second thing is the subject property is not adjacent to any node. So basically, it can't be an expansion of an existing node. So that's one thing you need to look at. The closest node is the County Road 510 66 Avenue node, and that's a tenth of a mile to the east, so it's not adjacent, and it's only 33.7% developed. So when you're looking at this, the request doesn't constitute a node expansion, and even if it was an expansion, even if the subject property were adjacent to an existing node, the existing node isn't 70% developed. So if this request doesn't constitute an expansion of a node, what is it? Well, the bottom line is if it's not an expansion, it's a request for creation of a new node, because it's not adjacent to an existing node. It's separate from it, it's standalone, so basically it's creation of a new node. Well, policy 1.25 says that a new node can't be created or a node can't be expanded within 1.5 miles of an existing commercial industrial node. And as I said, the subject property is only a tenth of a mile away from the County Road 510 62nd Avenue node, and it's actually only 85 hundredths of a mile away from the big US 1 County Road 510 node. So there's no question that the proposal does not meet, it's not consistent with policy 1.25. Another policy we have in the comp plan is policy 1.43. And policy 1.43 provides guidance and sets criteria for where certain zoning districts should be. And the general commercial zoning district is one of our more intense commercial districts. And if you look at the criteria, two of them are real important here. Well, one is especially important, and that's that the general commercial district should be separated from residential development. And that means ideally you don't have general commercial, you don't have CG abutting residential, particularly single family residential. Ideally what you have is either you have an intervening commercial district like OCR, office commercial residential, or CL, limited commercial, or you have multifamily residential. And that provides more of a buffer and more of a separation from the types of uses that can go in the general commercial district. And in this case, the subject property abuts single-family residential, so rezoning it to CG would be inconsistent with 1.43. Another policy we have is policy 14.3, and that requires that the request meet one of four criteria to be approved, and those criteria either an oversight in the approved plan, a mistake in the approved plan, a substantial change in circumstances relating to the subject property, or a swap or reconfiguration of land uses at separate sites. In this case, the approved plan that we have correctly designates the subject property and surrounding properties for residential use. You saw the land use map, the future land use map, how the subject property is designated, what the surrounding properties are designated. So it's pretty obvious there wasn't an oversight, there wasn't a mistake, there's not a change in circumstances, and this isn't a land use swap. So basically, staff's position is the request is not consistent with several applicable comp plan policies. Now, another item I want to get into is compatibility. And in this cases, and again, as you can see from the aerial, there are residential uses on, actually, there are existing residential uses on the north and east, and there's residential land use designation and zoning actually all the way around the subject property. And when you look at compatibility, I mentioned before that one of our policies says that CG, general commercial, should be separated from residential. And the reason for that is that commercial sites, particularly CG sites, have the potential for impacts that can adversely affect particularly single-family residential. And those are noise, odor, lights, safety, dumpsters, trash areas, and loading zones. And particularly when you look at the subject property and how it would be developed, it's almost a given that the fronts of a strip center would face 66th Avenue and County Road 510, and you'd have the dumpsters and the loading areas and the places where you have the noise and lights and smells back up against the single-family residential. And that's one of the issues, one of the problems, one of the reasons that we have a policy to separate CG from residential uses. So our position is that the proposal is not compatible with the surrounding area. Now, I want to point your attention to a policy that I'm sure you're pretty familiar with because we talked about in the last couple of years, and that's Policy 5.6, the future land use element. This is our mixed use policy. And the reason that I want to point this out is that that policy actually gives the applicant an opportunity to put commercial on the property. Basically, given the criteria of policy 5.6, he could put up to 38,000 square feet of commercial on this property. Yes, it has to be mixed use. Yes, it has to be done as a planned development project. The benefit is that the county gets the opportunity to look at the design and minimize the impacts to surrounding areas. As a matter of fact, it's pretty much a given with a mixed-use project that you would have intervening uses between the existing single-family and the commercial aspect of a mixed-use project. Most likely what you'd have is multifamily surrounding the commercial. So I think it's important to note that this wasn't a go away, you can't do commercial here. What we told the applicant was you can do commercial. In fact, the reason that the county adopted policy 5.6 as far as part of the year-based plan amendments was to prohibit exactly this situation where we have more disconnected commercial development, where we have nodes or just standalone commercial put in, or we have just strips of commercial. That's exactly what the county doesn't want. It's exactly why this policy was established, and this is a perfect case of where it can be put in and how it can be used and how the applicant can actually get the use that he wants. Maybe not how he does it or the timing that he wants, but it's an opportunity for him to do that. What I want to do now is go through the applicant's analysis. I'm not going to go through every statement on the 21-page analysis. What we've done, Stan was instrumental in this, is we've gone through the applicant's analysis, tried to distill the major points, and we have put staff response to that. Actually, you saw that in our staff report. We've identified these items, and we did that in our staff report, and I'm going to do it now. So the first statement that we've taken from the applicant's analysis is the existing County Road 510 62nd Avenue node is broken, and it can be fixed by the requested node expansion. Now, our response is that the existing node, County Road 510 62nd Avenue node, it actually accommodates existing commercial uses that are already there and allows for some additional commercial uses. It's a small node, but it serves the need of the neighborhood. But more importantly, there is the major node in the Wabasso area, which is the County Road 510 US 1 node. And that was just expanded recently, actually at this applicant's request. So our position is neither one of those nodes are broken. They're both appropriate as they are. But more so, our position is, and I mentioned this before, this request is not a node expansion. So the statements that I read were not correct from the applicant. The property is not adjacent to a node, so it can't be an expansion of a new node. As I said, the bottom line is what the applicant is suggesting is to create a new node. And a new node cannot be created there because it's not consistent with policy 1.25 that requires a minimum of 1.5 mile separation distance. So let me go to the next point from the applicant's analysis, and that's that the requested change will redevelop a blighted area. And our position is that's not the case. You saw the aerials. The subject property is vacant right now. It's not blighted. It doesn't have rundown, dilapidated structures on it. So this is not a blighted property. Another point that in the applicant's analysis is the requested change will improve the North County's jobs housing balance. Well, the jobs housing balance has already been addressed with the Liberty Park project. That commercial square footage was not taken into consideration when our jobs housing balance was done. So that really helps the jobs balance with the 209,000 square feet of commercial uses that are approved there. And anyhow, policy 4.8, which is the jobs housing balance, states that the county will not approve amendments that lower the jobs housing balance. It's not a basis to justify amendments to redesignate property to commercial industrial, because basically that would be a rationale for redesignating every property in the county to commercial. And that just is not the point of policy 4.8. And this just reinforces that policy. If you believe in that line of reasoning, that line of reasoning really can be just misused to justify commercial at any place. And that policy doesn't justify redesignating this property. Another point that we've identified from the analysis is that the location and distribution of CI designated property in Wabasso is not where it's needed, and the requested change will correct that deficiency. The staff's position is that that isn't correct. We've got the main node in the Wabasso area over at US 1 and County Road 510, and that can accommodate large commercial development. And as I said, it was recently expanded at the request of the applicant. And the commercial industrial land that's there in Wabasso is located appropriately to serve the community. And there's no node locational deficiency that really needs to be corrected. So our position is that the CI designated property in Wabasso is sufficient and is properly located. And in terms of location and distribution, besides CI designated property, we do have the 209,000 square feet of commercial area in the Liberty Park project that is at the same intersection as the subject property. So there is an adequate distribution and appropriate location of allowable commercial area in Wabasso. And as I said before, the applicant can still put more commercial development there. He can put up to 38,000 square feet of commercial on his property based on policy 5.6 and doing the project as a mixed-use development. The applicant also indicated in his analysis that the requested change will reduce sprawl, by preventing the site from being developed as another disconnected residential development. Well, that's not a good argument, because he's just requesting another disconnected commercial development in this case to replace a disconnected residential development. And as we said, what we propose is that he do a mixed-use project, which is the better anti-sprawl approach. And I'm getting almost through with our analysis of his analysis.
It's thorough.
And there's a lot to it. Actually, if we wanted to go through all 21 pages, we could probably be here until a long time. So let me just go through this, and the applicant says that policy 1.24 can be met in any number of ways, and that's the policy that says a node has to be at least 70% developed in order to be expanded, and is met by the requested change, since the term "or otherwise warranted" must be interpreted broadly. Well, the staff disagrees with the applicant. We think he's taking the term "otherwise warranted" out of context. If you look at policy 1.24, the exceptions in there are really detailed and specific, and the "otherwise warranted" is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It's not a wild card. It needs to be looked at really narrowly. But more importantly, as I said before, this is not a node expansion. It's not adjacent to an existing node, so it's not a node expansion. It is creation of a new node. So basically, our position is that the applicant's analysis, as detailed as it was, as long as it was, all 21 pages of it, doesn't demonstrate that the requested change meets all applicable comp plan policies. So in conclusion, staff's position is that the proposed land use amendment or rezoning does meet concurrency with our conditional concurrency certificate. It's not going to have any adverse environmental impacts, but it's not compatible with surrounding uses, and it's not consistent with the comp plan. Staff doesn't support the amendment, and staff recommends that the Planning and Zoning Commission deny the request to change the land use designation from L2 to CI, and also deny the rezoning.
Well, thank you for that very thorough analysis. I asked my fellow P&Z commissioners, would you mind if we just move straight to the public hearing, or do we want to have questions of staff beforehand, or can we just move this along, because it looks like the applicant probably is going to want to speak, and can we just move that to public hearing? Okay, we're going to open the public hearing. Please state your name and address for the record, please.
Good evening, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. I'm Joseph Paladin, president of Black Swan Consulting and Entitlement. I'm going to be representing this project, and I'll be a part of this project from the beginning to the very end. I'm going to make a brief statement here, introduce my engineer, who has his own PowerPoint that we'd like to present, and I'm going to pass out a breakdown of all of our bullet points that we are going to bring up as we do our presentation and as I do a closing argument after he's done doing his PowerPoint. So I would ask that my engineer come up, and Stan, can you help us plug in over there so we can do our PowerPoint? And I'm going to pass out these papers to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Oh my goodness.
Mr. Chairman, while they're getting set up, could I ask Bob a quick question?
Yes, please do. Yes, sir.
Bob, refresh me on the mixed-use plan that we went through last year or the year before. It's 25% of the property. How do you cap? Where's the 38,000 cap come from?
Because we have a floor area ratio of 0.35.
Okay, so when you take the 2.5 acres out of the, or 2.4, whatever, the most, it's 38,000 is what he gets because of the floor ratio. That's the maximum.
Yeah, if you take the 9.98 acres, multiply that by 0.25, and then multiply that by 0.35, and then multiply those by 43,560.
That's what we get? Okay.
Yes.
That's the .35 is what I couldn't remember.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I think that my engineer's ready to go ahead and do our presentation, and I would ask when he's done that I can sum up what we have to say, and then after you let the audience participate, I have a closing argument. Thank you very much, sir. Joe, go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paladin. Good evening, Commissioners. My name is Joseph Scholke, for the record, and we Scholke Van Stoddard, Vero Beach, Florida. I assisted in the preparation of this application for land use amendment and change of zoning. Mr. Paladin, as you know, is here as well. I'd like to say this PowerPoint presentation is brief, but it's probably just as long as Bob's because, well, his staff report gave me a lot to talk about. So if you can bear with me, I'll try to get through this. The proposal, as Bob had mentioned, is to change the land use, the 9.98 acres from L2 to CI, Commercial Industrial, change the zoning district from RM6, 6 units per acre, to CG, Commercial General District. The location, as you know, is on the northeast corner of 510 and 66th Avenue, and we're proposing to expand the existing CR 510 and 62nd Avenue CI commercial node. Ooh, this goes a little quick. Okay. The map you'll see up top, you can see, oh, okay, my mouse works here. This is the existing commercial node. This is the property right up here. This is the Liberty Park PD, whereas Bob had mentioned there's over 200,000 square foot of approved commercial use. This is a proposed zoning map of the area, plan development in this area. You've got all RM6 multifamily from the top to the north and to the east. Here's the property right here, which we propose to be rezoned to commercial general. And then you have the commercial area, the existing node right here. And this is an aerial of the same, so you can see what is here now. Our proposal tonight is to provide evidence that we believe this is consistent with the objectives and policy of the comprehensive plan. We did provide a detailed analysis and included your staff report. There's 18 pages. I am going to tonight address specific policies that staff cited that we do not comply with. They're policies 1.20, 1.24, 1.25, 1.29, and 14.3. We also believe that this proposal is supported by the analysis section of the comprehensive plan, and we'll show later on that this project, in fact, if it was developed in a commercial manner, is compatible with the surrounding area. And we believe the location is appropriate. Commercial needs to be at this intersection, and we believe the expansion will change the node. It will make it more economically viable. Before I get into further expansion, I want to talk about the existing node, the existing commercial industrial node at CR 510 and 62nd Avenue. It's only 5.35 acres in size. According to the comp plan, it's developed at about 34%. And according to the comp plan, it's part of a one of 3 blighted areas in Indian River County. Again, this is a map of the property, of the surrounding land uses, and the existing area. I'm pointing to where the mouse is. Existing CI node is right here. We believe the existing CI node is non-functional. We had said broken before, but it has limitations. It has limitations due to its size, due to its location, the individual parcel sizes, and the ownership, and it cannot serve its intended function. We believe limitations are it's too small to support any significant redevelopment. Like I said, 5.35 acres, that's the total site, including right-of-way. There's 16 small parcels, there's numerous owners, and there's no continuity. It's bisected by residential roads, north and south, in 3 areas. This is a copy of the existing zoning map, and again, I want you to look at the commercial limited zoning district right here. It's completely surrounded by single family. It is 16 parcels, and it's divided by residential roads that serve the residential area here. Again, we think it's non-functional, it's broken, it's at an unsuitable location. Contrary to policy 117 and 120, it's not adjacent to an intersection of thoroughfare roads and arterials. It's located amidst a residential area, and it spans across several residential side streets. We believe it has inadequate access Currently, there are no pedestrian improvements, and vehicular access will be limited severely when 510 improvements are made. They're going to put a median through the whole roadway with only access through the median at 64th Avenue. And the only median point would be right here with the last plans we looked at. Entire 510 along this area will have a median, and that will severely restrict the access. Excuse me while I take a drink of water. So, as I said, we think it's non-functional, it's broken, and the result is we believe the existing node as it is contrary to many of our own comp plan policies. It's not viable to redevelop the existing properties due to its size, location, the numerous owners, and the current existing conditions. And you can look at the future land use main objective, policy 117 and policy 120. It fails to reduce traffic and greenhouse gas emissions because it's not feasible to develop. Objective 4, we believe it fails to concentrate urban uses and discourage urban sprawl. Everybody has to travel quite a distance in this area to get to any commercial uses. This intersection is one of the busiest in the North Indian River County. You couldn't imagine, why is 510 failing? Why is that intersection failing right now? And why do these improvements need to be done? It's because it's so busy. Now, all these people are traveling past this intersection, and I think it is a great benefit for when you have specialty retail service, stuff like that. 50% of your passerbys will stop in a place, or any your new trips on a commercial development, 50% are bypass capture. So in other words, people are going to want to stop somewhere that's on the way. They don't want to go out of the way. And you have so much traffic from South Sebastian, from all the development on 510, from Vero Lake Estates to pass through this intersection and have to go well out of the way to find a commercial services, retail services, maybe convenience store or something like that. So it fails to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. It fails to concentrate urban uses, as I said, and we believe it fails to encourage economic development. It does not provide incentive to redevelop. It does not provide the local community with the needed commercial, retail service, or employment opportunities. They're really vacant. There's nothing in the Wabasso area right now. The existing commercial industrial node provides very little for the community, I believe. It fails to address blighted conditions that are outlined in the analysis in Objective 11, and really the existing node provides no practical opportunity to serve the adjacent community. What we believe will happen if we expand this node is we'll correct what we believe is an oversight to the recently adopted changes to the comprehensive plan in October 2010. We believe Erie County failed to address Wabassa's blighted conditions. It's identified all over the analysis section of the comp plan. And we believe they've failed to address basically a non-functional node. We believe the policies pertaining to the Wabasso sub-area of the county have been ignored, basically. Again, a copy of the plan. You see the location here. Expanding the node, the location, but expanding the node to the 510 66th Avenue intersection, we're meeting policies of 117, 120, 122, and 41. Essentially, we're making the node contiguous to 2 thoroughfare roads. We're making it contiguous to, adjacent to Liberty Park's proposed commercial development area. And we're situated to serve 3 population concentrations. I would say to the north Sebastian, to the east Wabasso area, and to the west and north Vero Lake Estates, and all the developments that were either land use was changed by the county from rural to L1 or annexed into the city along 510 to the west. This is a copy of an aerial. This shows the Liberty Park PD. This area in here is a 200,000 square foot. It's actually 208,900, something like that. This is the area, Liberty Park, relative to this site. Also part of Liberty Park is a public use facility. It was planned to be a fire station right in here. Expanding the node. Expanding the node will improve accessibility. And as Objective 4 says, we need to provide an efficient mix of uses to reduce traffic demand and greenhouse gas emissions. What I talked about before, capturing all this traffic that's going by the intersection. We'll decrease many of the trips, allow the mileage on the roads, reduce greenhouse gases, and all those benefits. It's situated at a major signalized intersection. It's at the crossroads of travel routes of 3 major population areas, which I mentioned before. And again, we believe it will reduce traffic demand. It's a proposed aerial which shows different uses, the property, subject property right here, Liberty Park, the existing commercial node over to the east. So what we believe, in summary, is that expanding the node will make the node functional and compliant with a comprehensive plan. It'll repair a broken and non-functional commercial node, which we believe will meet policy 1.22. We locate commercial services where they are needed. It's in accordance with policy 1.17, 1.20, 1.22. It'll help address blighted conditions, objective 11. We believe it'll help balance the jobs housing ratio. That's the analysis section. We believe it'll provide a more equivalent distribution of commercial. We'll redistribute commercial to needed areas in this area of Indian County, in the Wabasso area. We believe it'll provide opportunities for economic development. And we believe it will create needed retail, personal services, employment opportunities for the West Wabasso area and surrounding communities. And finally, we think it will increase land use efficiency and facilitate economic development. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the consistency with the objectives and policy of the comprehensive plan. As I said, I submitted a detailed analysis. It's in your packet. It's 18 pages. But I'm not going to go over every one of them. I'm going to go over the policies that staff cited that they believe we do not meet. Excuse me a second. Policy 1.2. Commercial industrial designated areas shall be structured as nodes. These nodes shall be located along roads with functional classification appropriate to the level of activity. We believe expanding the existing node to a more appropriate location will provide the following. We're locating commercial services where they're needed. We're providing this commercial area adjacent to the intersection of 2 arterial roadways with direct links suited to serve 3 urban population centers, the Sebastian area, Vero Lake Estates, and the West Wabasso community. And according with policy 1.2, it is within the urban service area. Again, a copy of the, this is the land use map, but it shows the arrows of Sebastian to the north that we'll be providing services for, the traffic from Vero Lake Estates and all the properties on the West CR 510 area, and the traffic from Wabasso area will be serving all those communities. And I think the map that Bob had put up earlier called the location context map really puts it in perspective. If you look to the west of this property, south side of Sebastian, all the way out to Vero Lake Estates, there's no commercial. You can go up into the Sebastian by the Shark Mart, but when I don't know the percentage, but I live in Sebastian and I drive that way, and I can tell you it seems like 80% of the traffic is going to work to Vero every day. They're not going to go out of the way to the north from Vero Lake Estates. They'd rather hit a store on their way right at this intersection. It makes sense to be there. So policy 1.2, just expansion just makes sense. It's common sense. Commercial services are needed in this location to serve the nearby urban centers. And I believe the comprehensive plan recognizes that this node should be expanded. If you look in the analysis section of the future land use element, and I'll read portions of it, recent and future growth in the Sebastian area to the north will most likely act as a catalyst for land use changes in this area. This is right out of the comprehensive plan. The likely result will be the elimination of some older and smaller commercial uses and residential uses in favor of larger commercial uses dependent on the high traffic volumes. Policy 1.2, the question, expansion or a new node? I think we've already approved the expansion. Liberty Park was approved with over 200,000 square feet to the west of us. Have we expanded? I would think so. Again, here's a look at the intersection. You've got 200,000 square foot of potential commercial area approved to the west of us, further west than the existing CI node. Expansion or new node? Staff said that, hey, you're non-contiguous. You're a tenth of a mile away. It's 500 feet away to be exact. We measured it. But as I said before, we're adjacent to previous expansion, Liberty Park, 200,000 square feet. And another thing I want to point out, we're not setting a precedent. There are 4 other nodes in Indian River County, commercial industrial nodes, that have 9 locations where the CI land use is non-contiguous. And I'll show you a copy of that. Here are different areas of the county, and I'm pointing to all the non-contiguous areas within the same zones where CI land use is not adjacent to each other. We have up in Sebastian, up in this area right in here. We have in this area right here where it's not contiguous. You have Gifford, there are 2 nodes, and you have plenty of areas that are non-contiguous in these 2 different nodes of commercial. You have, even in State Road 60, on the further east end, there's 2 nodes of State Road 60. There's a west node and an east node, and these areas are non-contiguous, and here it's non-contiguous. So I don't think we're setting a precedent because we're only 500 feet away. What I think we're trying to do is expand the node to an area that makes sense, and it'll serve the whole community, the Wabasso community, and the North Indian River County area. Policy 1.24. No node shall be expanded unless 70% of the subject node's land areas, less rights-of-way, is developed with non-residential and non-agricultural uses, or approved for non-residential, non-agricultural development, or otherwise warranted by the proposed development. Bob talked about that. He said that's limited and perhaps doesn't mean what I think it says. But there was another line that follows right after that, and it says, otherwise, and this is right out of the comp plan, otherwise warranted may include but not be limited to the following, and then gives the 7 conditions, but not be limited to the following. Now, we met with Ellen, the county attorney, in February, and he concurs with us. And here's the email from Ellen. It says that, in effect, you want to know if you could argue that other circumstances warranted an expansion, even if the circumstances did not meet any of the specifically listed criteria. My interpretation is that policy 1.24 does allow an applicant to make the argument. Policy 1.24. Now I'm going to give you the reasons why it's otherwise warranted and not limited to. We're going to change the existing node to make it functional and viable. The location is very important. It's the right location for commercial use, as I explained to you before. We're at the intersection of 2 arterial roads. We're in close proximity to urban populations at the crossroads. The size, we're going to create a large commercial parcel, large enough to actually develop. It'll be a viable development. By doing this, we'll encourage economic development. By doing this, we'll help maintain the appropriate jobs and housing balance in this area. By doing this, we'll provide opportunities for economic development. And by doing this, we'll create needed retail, personal services, and employment opportunities for the area, especially the Wabasso community. Policy 1.24. The expansion is otherwise warranted for this reason. It will assist in the redevelopment of a blighted area. Bob pointed out that this property is not blighted. I can tell you there were a few shacks that my client demoed on it, but it's not the point that this property is a blighted property. It's in a blighted community. It's part of the Wabasso community. And anything we can do to create economic development, retail and commercial services for this area, employment opportunities for this area is going to help that blighted community, which Indian River County has identified in their comp plan as one of 3 blighted areas in Indian River County. Objective 11 talks about Indian River County will take action to increase redevelopment in at least these 3 blighted areas. Within the CUP analysis, it goes on and talks about within Wabasso, the blighted portion of the area is concentrated west of the FEC Railroad along 510. That area has been targeted in the past for assistance by the county. Also, it says recent and future growth in the Sebastian area, I read this before, will most likely act as a catalyst for land use changes in this area. The likely result will be the elimination of some older and smaller commercial uses and residential uses in favor of larger commercial uses dependent on higher traffic volumes. And the last one in the analysis section, one obstacle to major development is the difficulty in assembling enough parcels to create a site large enough for commercial development. I think we're meeting all this criteria. Staff put in their staff report, I think at the end, an attachment that showed some of these things and claimed that that Wabasso area, what they were talking about was Wabasso proper, but not West Wabasso. I have to disagree with them. when I read that, attachment 7, it says Wabasso is an old incorporated community at this intersection of US 1 and 510, extending north and south along US 1 and west on County Road 510. Further down in that paragraph, while citrus packing processing is the largest commercial industrial use, residential uses including the single-family homes and mobile homes extend along US 1 and CR 510. Within Wabasso, the blighted portion of the area is concentrated west of the FEC Railroad along 510. Further down in the second paragraph, where I quoted before, in fact, recent and future growth on the Barrier Island and in the Sebastian area to the north. Now, 510 and US 1, Sebastian is not north of that. Sebastian is north of 510 and 66th Avenue. The last sentence: it is important that the county continue to eliminate substandard housing and maintain code enforcement activity in West Wabasso. I do not know how he can conclude that this is talking about whatever Wabasso proper is, because this area is certainly Wabasso, it's certainly near the blighted area, and certainly we could do a lot to improve this area. Having a little problem here with this. I did escape, I think. Excuse me a second, having a little technical problem. All right, thank you, Stan. Policy 1.25. Commercial industrial nodes shall be created or expanded to within, shall not be created or expanded within 1.5 miles of an existing commercial industrial node. We believe we're not creating, we're only expanding. We're expanding to the west and to the north. As I said before, there's only a 500-foot strip between it, and there's at least 9 other occasions in Erie County where we have that same situation. So I can't find anywhere it says you have to be adjacent. We see all over the county where there's non-contiguous areas. So I'll leave that to the P&Z to decide, but I think we're okay. There are no other nodes within 1.5 miles of the expanded area to the north, west, or south. Certainly the US 1 510 area is within 1.5 miles, but you know, we already have a node. The 62nd Avenue node is already there. We're not expanding to the east, we're expanding to the west. And I would further say that the existing expansion, Liberty Park, it's an existing expansion. Erie County has already approved 200,000 square foot of commercial use at the intersection to the west. We've already expanded the node. Again, here's a picture, aerial. It shows Liberty Park right in here, 200,000 square feet. It shows our proposal right here, which goes to about here. And 500 foot away is existing commercial industrial node. Policy 1.29, they cited that. I can't quite understand it because it seems to just be an administrative requirement. They list the acres of all the nodes there. Policy 14.3. In Erie County shall approve plan amendments only upon a showing that one of the following criteria has been met. I think we've met 2, and I'm going to show you how. Staff says we haven't met any. I think we've met at least 2. I think the amendment will correct an oversight in the approved plan, and I think the proposed amendment is warranted based on substantial change in circumstances, and I'll show you how. We're going to correct an oversight to the recently adopted changes to the comprehensive plan, October 2010. I mentioned that before. I think many of the policies pertaining to the Wabasso area of the county have been ignored. I think the expansion of the node will help meet compliance with the plan. We'll place commercial uses where they're needed. We're going to provide equivalent distribution. We're going to distribute commercial land use to the Wabasso area. I don't think they have their fair share. We don't have the fair share in this area of the county. We're going to address blighted conditions. We're going to balance the jobs housing ratio, help balance it. We're going to provide opportunities for economic development. We're going to provide opportunities to reduce the traffic demand and greenhouse gas emissions, and we'll repair a broken and non-functional commercial node. Now, these are probably 10 different policies which I named earlier that we're in compliance with and will help. Policy 14.3. There are substantial changes in circumstances to the property. What says the proposed amendment is warranted based on a substantial change in circumstances. The change in circumstances must affect the subject property. I'll show you how. Erie County took 2.8 acres of the property from the site, an extraction. They took right away for 510 and 66th Avenue, and they took a drainage easement, 2.8 acre drainage easement along the rear of our site. We had a site plan approved for 60 units. This expansion, this taking avoided our approval, can't be built. Another change, Liberty Park. It was approved with 200,000 square foot commercial, 900 units. That's right adjacent to us. Certainly it affects our property. And Erie County and Sebastian have changed and intensified residential land uses to the west. The city's annexed a lot of land that was ag. It's now 3 units per acre. We had a bunch of land that was designated R, 1 unit per acre, which is now 3 units per acre, all right down 510. These are all substantial changes, I think, that affect this property and justify the change. Here's a letter, January 2007. It's very hard to read, but basically this is a letter from Erie County saying we're developing 510 and 66th Avenue, and a portion of your property will be required for those new improvements. And we were forced to come to the table, and they got their extraction. Compatibility. Compatibility is an important issue that Bob said we don't meet. I don't agree with him. I think we do meet compatibility for this particular property. For the commercial general zoning district, you should be along arterial roads and major intersections. You need to be separated from residential development. You need to be separated from industrial areas. You need to be neo-retail and office areas. And I'll show you how we'll meet that. Before I do, I just want to compare to the existing node. The non-functional node, it's in the wrong place, that 5.35 acres. That particular node is surrounded by RS3 and RS1 and single-family homes. That particular node crosses residential roads and is bisected by residential roads. You can see on the map here, and you look at your commercial area, surrounded by commercial, single-family here, bisected by residential roads here. That's the node we want to expand. Our expansion is not, we're not going to have the same scenario. It's not going to be adjacent to single family, and we're going to have a multitude of buffers, and I'll explain that to you. First of all, as you said, we have to be adjacent to arterial roads. We are. We're going to be along 2 arterial roads with direct links to adjacent population concentrations. The adjacent properties that we talked about, to the north property, where Bob was mentioned single-family homes, I can tell you, north of our property line, there are either road or drainage right-of-ways first. Second, I'll tell you, it's zoned RM6. There are single-family homes there, but Erie County Utilities is currently putting in sewer. We have water now. I think, and this is an older neighborhood, I think you expect to see a lot of multifamily development in the future, potentially in the future in that area. Bob himself said that a multifamily zoning would be compatible and appropriate in his thing just a little while ago, adjacent to commercial general. Say to the east, it's also zoned RM6. To the south, we have County Road 510. It's going to be 4 or 5 lane highway, left turn lanes. We have Liberty Park PD with a public government use, a fire station right across from us. We do have a little of RS1, which I failed to mention here, but you'll see it on the map. To the southwest, we have a major intersection, 66th Avenue and 510, which is going to be fully expanded. And then beyond that, we have Liberty Park and 200,000 square foot of commercial parked right there. To the west of us, we have 66th Avenue to be widened to 4 lanes, 120 foot of right-of-way, I believe, maybe 160, and then we have RS1. Again, here's a look at the proposed zoning. You see the planned development area here, 200,000 square foot of commercial. Planned development area, Liberty Park here. A planned fire station. 66th Avenue is to be widened here. We have 510 here. This is zoned RM6. It's not single family. And there is a drainage right-of-way, which I have another map, you'll see it more clearly here, and a road right-of-way more clearly right here. Besides what's existing, I'm going to tell you the development compatibility measures that Bob and Stan probably haven't thought about that I think are significant considerations that you need to consider. Again, there's an existing drainage road right-of-way on our north property lines. The Erie County extractions, They took 2.8 acre drainage easement at our north and east property line, and I'll show you a picture of that. And there's a required buffer yard, minimum 25-foot, 6-foot opaque type B buffer on our north and east property line when this property is developed. So the result is this. You'll see that this entire area is a drainage easement. Erie County is going to build a lake there for 510 and 66th Avenue. Then we have a 25-foot buffer requirement before this is developed, and there's existing canal or drainage easement here and existing road right-of-way here. So you can see that when you add up the drainage easements, the buffers, the right-of-way, we're 100 foot or more just about everywhere from that existing residential neighborhood. And there's nothing we can do about it. That's a fact. That's what it will be when this is developed. So in conclusion, I want to say I believe we are consistent with objectives and policies of the comprehensive plan. We provided detailed analysis, and it's included in the application, sheets 1 through 18. We believe we are consistent with policies 1.20, 1.29, 1.24, 1.25, and 14/3. We believe our proposal is supported by the analysis section of the comp plan. We believe the location is the right location to expand commercial into. It'll make this node in this area more economically viable. And we believe, as I showed before, development of commercial property in this area will be compatible with the surrounding area. I put a lot of work into this, a lot of thought into it, and I know you have a lot to digest. Mr. Paladin is going to comment as well, and I'm certainly going to be available for any questions you may have.
Commissioners, Mr. Chairman, the good news is I do not have a PowerPoint. I'll just be making some statements based on what's been presented and what I feel would be important statements you all should consider. I'd like to have a brief question I'd like to ask your county attorney before I proceed. Bill, does your county attorney's office maintain the position they did in the letter we received when we submitted this?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Let me make these statements. Listen, we're approved to build around 69 townhouses.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
We're approved to build around 69 townhouses on that site.
Okay.
Now, if I was really foolish enough to think that building 69 townhouses was intelligent today, and if I found a bank that was really dumb enough to loan me the money to build them, and if I got real lucky and found 69 very dumb people to buy them, they couldn't get 69 mortgages. This just ain't going to happen. It's just not viable. These are different times, people. Things that happened 15, 20 years ago, things that I helped change 7 years ago for the Growth Awareness Committee, things that we did, things are different today. They're very different today. The world's in financial trouble. The United States is in financial trouble. States in financial trouble. Indian River County's got less than half of what their budget used to be out of impact fees, not what their budget is now. We need jobs. We need a tax base. We need impact fees. This does those things. This is good for the county. Let me just reflect on a few other developments in the county that I'm familiar with or part of. Let's start with Waterway Village. Waterway Village has built several homes, several residential homes. They had promised to build retail, services, stores, etc. Never happened. It's an empty field. It's still an empty field. Grand Harbor, a lot of residencies, no commercial, no retail, no services for the community. Just a lot of residential. Point West, we've been up here several times discussing that. When are we going to build out East Village? When are we going to build the services there? When are we going to have the restaurants or stores or laundries or, post office or whatever? Residential, a lot of residential built. Still building residential. D.R. Horton's out there still building residential. Not the first service, not the first retail commercial service for the people that live out there. It's just never done. It's always a problem. Liberty Park's been brought up tonight, which I've spoken on and represented. Liberty Park is someday maybe a great development. One of the negotiations with the county with Liberty Park was They want to build their commercial retail. Some of the negotiations was, well, how many units do we have to build before we do commercial retail? So it's like 250 units, then they can get 100,000 square feet. You know, whatever the exact number is. Point is, the emphasis was on commercial retail because we never get the services or the commercial retail that were promised in these developments. Because they go forward and they build the residential, they build the homes, they sell out to the builders, and then the commercial retail that's promised that you got pictures of when you go in there never happens. I'm asking you to let me do the opposite. It makes no sense to build any residential. This corner does make sense to have commercial retail services. Not something that the community can't use. I'm going on record. Not a junkyard or a big manufacturing plant or a cement company. We're not talking about that. We're talking about a dry cleaners, a laundromat, a convenience store, a small bank, you know, a branch of a bank, maybe a small hardware store, services to service the community. That's what our consultants, that's what our business study says that will work there. That'll make this project profitable. I have financing to go forward with a commercial retail site. Design, we'll have to design this and get it approved by you all. You'll have to look at it. And I promise you, before I go to the county commission, I'm going to have a public meeting with the people that live out there and sit down and talk to everybody and see the type of things they would like to have. They have to be a part of the community. This is a Wabasso project. I want everybody to be a part of it. We're going to have 60 to 100 jobs that we're going to add to the community. We're going to hire 60 to 100 permanent jobs. We're going to have several jobs that will be temporary construction jobs. You all know me. I've never hired somebody out of the area to do any of my projects. We'll hire local electricians, local plumbers, local land clearers, local builders, local everything, period. Always done that. It'll be done here. So now we're going to pay impact fees to the county. We're going to increase the tax base. We're going to create jobs, which we need terribly in this county right now. We have financing to go forward with a commercial retail service site. And the other thing that my engineer brought up was about this drainage area and all that. We have an agreement with the county. If we go first and go forward, we put that in. Of course, I get credit for it and everything, but it's my dollar that puts that in. If the county has to make those improvements first, which they'll have to make those improvements sooner or later, because I also represent Orchid Quay, which we paid all of our impact fees, and we affect that intersection, so it has to be done. So instead of the county being responsible or having to come forward to put that in, we're going to have to do it if we go forward. Not to have to, we want to do it. We're part of the community. We want to do what's right. This is a win-win situation for everybody that's involved. Now, I'm not going to go over 1.23, 1.245, and 14.3 and everything we already did. We can do that. We need to start thinking outside of the box. We need to start trying to be leaders and service our community. We need to go forward with things that make sense today. Something that makes sense today may not make sense in 20 years, may not make sense in 10 years. Something that made sense 20 years ago, something that made sense 20 years ago may not make sense today. We have to do what's good for the community and good for the people today. Now, I don't think there's anybody that can look at that intersection and say the northeast corner of 510 and 66th Avenue isn't a wonderful place to have a service retail center of some kind. It only makes good sense, without getting into all these numbers and bore you again. It makes good sense to do it there. I need your help to get it done. We need to work together to make our community better than other communities, make our county better than other counties. And I think by looking into each site, each job, and each position, we need to change things as we go forward. We don't need to change the whole rule and regulation and the law so it abides 10, 20 years from now. Let's make guys come up here like I am. Let's make them come up here before you and staff and present their project and give you everything we can possibly give you without us going broke and ask you for permission to go forward. That's the position you want to be in. 10 years ago, I argued for PDs. PDs are a wonderful thing. Gives you the last shot to say what we're going to do. This is the same thing. We don't want to keep changing the rules because of the times. It's a very dangerous thing. But we need to approve projects that are going to bring money and substance to this community. And I think this will do that. I need your help to do it. Now, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to sit down and let you up to the rest of the public. And once they're done, I'd like to close. Thank you, sir. Any questions before I sit down? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Paladin. This public hearing is still open. Is there anyone from the audience that would like to go up and speak now? Thank you. Please just state your name and address for the record.
My name is Sandy Watts, and I live in this area of the county. And I don't know if anybody knew this or not. I was doing some research. I have 2 teenage daughters, and both of them have been looking for jobs recently. And I started doing some research on Indian River County. And one of the things that I found out is that compared to the unemployment rate here in Vero Beach is 11.9%. I'm sure everybody here is probably aware of that. I grew up here. I moved here in the 70s. I moved away. I'm a cracker. And Indian River County's changed a lot. We don't have citrus anymore like we did. Half the packing houses are more closed. Jobs are scarce. These are hard times. I travel this corridor a lot. And I don't know how many times between Kings Highway and 66th that I've had to go north and south and wondered to myself, how come there are no gas stations? How come there's no services? That whole mid-county area is just barren. We have no infrastructure there. Now, while I was doing this research, I also found something else out. Vero Beach is ranked number 7 in emerging metropolitan areas. Now, that means that more people are probably going to come here eventually. But my position is this, is we're lacking infrastructure in mid-county. I'd like to see infrastructure out there. I don't know how many times I've driven through that particular intersection and looked at that corner and thought, man, I wish there was a gas station here because I'm going to have to go to US 1 or I'm going to have to go to Sharp Mart. You know, it just makes sense. And not only that, but the job thing. And this Paladin, I think, said there was going to be like almost 100 jobs that would be available to people. And right now, I think 100 jobs in this county would go a long way. And I just think it just makes good sense. It's common sense. I like that location. Like I said, I've driven by it 100 times and thought, man, that'd be a great place for a gas station. You know, running the shine on gas. But that's really all I have to say. If there's changes to the rules, and I don't understand this whole node thing. If this node thing works like this, where that property is dependent upon the success of another piece of property, and it doesn't stand on its own, right now in these times, I don't see where that really makes good sense. It just seems to me that a piece of property that's commercial, or a piece of property like this, that's in that particular place, it just seems to me that it would make more sense to utilize it for something like Mr. Paladin's proposing than to just sit there and just let it sit because it's not being productive. If it requires a change in the rules, you know, my position on that is there's only 2 constants in the universe, God and change. So, you know, maybe it's time for a change. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, sir. Your name and address?
I'm Eugene Douglas, West Wabassa Civil League President, P.O. Box 489-3270 zip code.
Thank you.
Now, we the citizen do not oppose progress, but we just want to know what's going on in our neighborhood because we have a loss of senior citizen there, and we are concerned about the traffic off of 510 and 64th Avenue. Even today, if you go there at 4 o'clock, the traffic is back up from 66th Avenue to 64th Avenue. And we like to see something there to help the citizen out, but we don't want anything that comes there that's going to hurt the senior citizens in Wabassa. We have a cell tower that came to Wabassa and we didn't know anything about it, and we are very concerned about that. And yeah, we want to see progress, and that's why we want to know the pros and cons of the service center. Well, yeah, we like to have jobs in Wabassa and give it to qualified people in Wabassa, We love to see that. But we want everybody to think about the pros and cons and let your conscience be your guide the way that you're going to vote. Do I oppose? Well, I'm still listening for the pros and cons. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead. Why don't you go ahead and state your name and address for the record, and then
Thank you.
Michael, go ahead.
Julianne Price, 2179 10th Avenue. I'm not opposed to commercial, but I think commercial with the mixed use is the best way to go. I think that would be a better, it'd be more compatible with the surrounding residential areas. Short and sweet, that's it.
Thank you. God bless you.
Teddy Floyd, where the sheriff's out, and I used to live there on that property. The only thing, I agree with them, I'm not opposed to change. When you work in that community from day to day, you see people crying out, we see the hardships, and I'm concerned, just like the whole group, and they might not all be here, but we represent them. And the thing about it is, we just want to see progress, to see something that is there. And like Mr. Powell said, he put it on record. If he put it on record that he's going to go locally and get some, we want to be able to give some of those people in the community and seeing some of the younger people that are standing on those corners when you pass through there. I travel that thing 1,000,000 times a day. So when you see those guys on those corners, make them pull their pants up, give them a chance to get a job, give that young man, his daughters a chance to get a job. We keep it locally. I'm for that. Anything else I would be opposed to. That's all I had to say.
Thank you very much. Mike, why don't you come on down?
Good evening, Commissioners. Chairman, I'm Mike Ray. I live in 440 Gravestone Court here in Vero. My observation is not so much plus or minus about this particular proposal, but just an observation that there continues to be interest along this corridor. Mr. Palin represents a development, proposed development at the
I'm a little, just can you say it a little louder? A little bit louder. Thank you.
Is that better?
That's a little better, yeah.
You're not my age, but
I listened to a lot of rock and rolls when I was a teenager.
Okay.
Just blew it out, man. Blew it out.
My observation is that there continues to be a lot of interest in projects along the corridor from 510. Mr. Palin represents one at the Orchid Quay, I think is the name of the project, on the 510 and US 1. Our company, the one I work for, the Graves family, owns a lot of property along that same corridor that's been zoned commercial for a long time. We just went through a rezoning request for a few more acres there, and here comes another project that is being proposed in what may be a good location. But all of these are going forward, or at least being proposed to go forward, with a condition to traffic concurrency, subject to somebody, me or Joe or people we represent, or frankly what the county should be doing, is doing the road improvements to 510, which they've been talking about for years and years and years. It's supposed to be a DOT property, I mean a DOT project, as I recall. Then the county took it over to expedite it and move it forward a little bit quicker. Well, that dog don't hunt no more. And here
When
what
was
you
that,
have,
Mike? When was that? 3 years
I don't recall. I would say 06, 07. Joe Schulke read a letter here earlier this evening that spoke to people he represented having a taking in order to do this intersection or to do some of that widening. And I think he said that the letter was dated in 07, which is at least 5 years ago.
And that
and
project included 510 US 1 intersection as well?
Okay. So this has been bannering about and got buried in 60% drawings, which even when Mr. Paladin came forward within the last 8 or 9 months, and certain members of staff sat here and said, well, we're at 60% drawings. Well, hell, they've been at 60% drawings for 6 or 7 years. This isn't going anywhere. You have the potential, not perhaps with just this project that Mr. Paladin's representing now, but with that whole corridor to create probably conservatively 2,500 or 3,000 jobs. It's not going to happen until that infrastructure is in place. I'm not here, frankly, plus or minus for what Mr. Paladin's proposing, but would just like to go on record to say somebody needs to light a fire under the right people in the county to get this improvement situation moved forward.
It's hard to argue with the idea that the improvement of 510 in that intersection wouldn't be a good thing for the people of Wabasso. I mean, I said it's hard to argue that that wouldn't be a good thing for the people of Wabasso because it would pave the way for maybe not even new plans like Mr. Paladin, but existing plans to move forward.
That's exactly where I'm going with it, Sam. And and to say that conveniently that the improvements either need to be done under construction or in the first 3 years of the 5-year plan, and then it's convenient that it's in the 4th and 5th year, which I'm not saying is up to Bob or Stan's prerogative at all, is a convenient way of just simply continuing to kick this entire subject down the road and keep deferring and deferring. If the world changes tomorrow and the economy gets better and all of a sudden there's a demand to do what we are contemplating doing and what this program is contemplating to do, you couldn't put it in place in a timely fashion. It's not shovel ready. It's not going to happen because all of what needs to take place as far as the infrastructure is years away. To me, it makes more sense to push forward and get that infrastructure put in place and hope that the economy in the world will change and you can pull a trigger and pull these things out of the ground and get going with them much sooner instead of getting this approved subject to having that infrastructure in place and then having to wait 4 or 5 years for somebody puts the funding together, makes it happen. And that's really kind of what my point is tonight.
Thank you.
Might as well wait.
Mr. Chairman, may I make a quick comment based on what Mr. Ray just said while it's fresh in our mind? Because I'm a very big part of this. In Orchid Quay, he's right. Now, we've written a check for well over $8 million in total impact fees for either improvement in the intersection or widening of 510, and it also affects this intersection I'm speaking of. And it helped acquire the right-of-way that was bought by the county. So I'm pretty familiar with what's going on. I understand Mr. Ray's frustration. It was my frustration, but I can tell you the county has a fire lit. The county is working with us trying to get this done. We're negotiating right now with Mr. Baird and Mr. Moore. We've had meetings, and even Mr. Keating a while back, about the fact that my project, the commercial part of my project, my stores don't want to go in there and spend millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, and then have the road and the intersection tore up a year after they start. It just makes no sense. So we're negotiating right now that we're going to be guaranteed that that intersection and that improvement is going to be completed when my stores are completed, because that's the only way I can get.
What timeline are you guys talking about?
We're talking probably in the next 2 to 3 years. Finished. Because, you know, if we start building and developing in 6 months, you're looking at 18 months to 24 months to get our first stores finished. And in order to get those stores finished and guarantee my people that want to take long-term leases or buy those stores, they're going to be guaranteed that that intersection is not going to be tore up. You know, that intersection is going to be raised 6 feet, give or take a little bit. So it's a major transition to what we have there. We've gone through all of that. The county's bought all the right-of-way they need. They've been cooperating with us. We've been working very closely with them. And I understand everybody's frustration, but in defense of the county, they've really sat down and they've worked with us, and they're going to put ink on paper, and guarantee me that I'm
You
going to
know
have
how different, you know how different this whole application would look to us if this was a 4-lane road and 510 US 1
absolutely.
intersection was done, and, I mean, it would look different, and the 512, 510 intersection was
understand that,
done.
Mr.
and-
Zimmerman.
I mean, it would look like, well, maybe this is a commercial node, you
And
know? I
I'm
mean-
on both ends of this. I'm at Oregon Quay and I'm at Vero Estates. And I'm saying the way this is going to get done is, besides the $8 million of impact fees we already paid, is to go ahead and keep the viable income coming into the county and pursuing this. That's more pressure on the county to get this done. We cannot build stores, we cannot build commercial retail spaces and then have it tore up and roadblocked off and put our people out of business. The store people aren't that stupid. They're demanding certain things. And we're demanding certain things of the county, and we work very close with the county, and they're setting down and guaranteeing us timelines that we can sit down and show to our people in writing and say, here's what we can do. Your store will be finished here. This intersection will be finished now. This road widening will be done. And I know the old story, 4 or 5 years.
Joe,
So
you
I've got
have
a
to
part
get,
of-
Joe, I hate to interrupt, you got to get this passed first, so could,
Yeah, but I just wanted to, let them know the county is doing something. The county is going
It'll
forward.
be a
And like
long night.
Mr. Zimmerman said, if we already had these improvements done, it would have a big input on maybe getting this project approved. And I think that this has to be taken into consideration.
Thank you. Is there anyone, this is a public hearing, yep, please come down.
I promise to make it short.
Right on.
My name's Ken Brennan. I live on Fordham Street in Sebastian. I've been here living here for 8 years. My family's been here since like 67 or something like that. So we've been here for a long time. The one thing that my occupation affords me to travel throughout the United States extensively, and I travel internationally. And the one thing I heard Mr. Paladin say that makes a lot of sense to me is being able to think outside the box, especially in these, troubled times that we're in. When you go to certain communities throughout the United States, there's some individual communities that, in spite of the way the conditions are in unemployment and the way the financial situation is, there are certain small communities that are thriving. And there's one of them that's close by here in Florida, and I'm sure everybody's been to the villages or seen. Now you have a place that's it exists in the middle of nowhere. Take a look at a community like that. Of course, somebody, the people that originate, I think, from Michigan or whatever, but the guy thought outside the box. He built in the middle of a cow pasture, for crying out loud. And the place is thriving. Why is it thriving? Because not only did he put in residential community, he has the services in the commercial areas to make itself exist. And the place is thriving. I'm sure there's got to be somebody who's been there before. You can talk to any of the people there, go to any of the restaurants, any of the bars there. They all love the place. There's not a nasty person you run into there. And that's the way everybody should start thinking now. You got to start thinking outside the box, or this place, we're going to go under. That's all I got to say.
Thank you.
I'll try and make it short, too.
Yeah. Be as persuasive as you can.
My name's Mike Lapp. I'm 6780 85th Street, the west property across Schumann. And about 10 years ago, I approached the county about going commercial, and they told me I would be better off annexing to the city of Sebastian and asking them. And they denied me more than once. And if this gets approved, then I want to go on record that I'm going to start an application for a commercial strip mall on my property, because if this flies, there's no reason why mine shouldn't fly, because your node is only going to go across the street. And when I was denied by these gentlemen here 10 years ago, they said there would never be commercial property in that area. And how this development across the street from me got their 5 acres, whether they mitigated and donated land, or they got 250 homes, or whatever they must get to get that, they got a 5-acre parcel of commercial land. I'm going to go for the same thing, and I hope to be approved if these gentlemen get approved for their project. And I want to go on record of saying that. And that's all I have to say.
Okay.
Sweet.
Hi, good evening.
Hi. I'm Taffy Apt. That was my husband. I live at the same address, 6780 85th Street, directly across the street from this property. And we were looking at, small, like, strip mall, like a western town, kind of little convenience stores. Same type of idea. I don't know exactly what his plans are. I wouldn't be totally opposed to it. I'd want to know more about it. There's the traffic is nonstop all day, especially you probably drive it. It's busy there. There isn't a lot of other places to service people who want to stop for water or want to stop for gas. It has a really good potential. And we've thought about it for a long time. We own 35 acres across the street from him. And so we could even support a bigger thing. And we've sold frontage for the county property, on both sides of our property. We're for, moving forward in future plans, and we really like where we live. We might want to just stay there forever and not change a thing, but we're always open to looking at new opportunities. And I just wanted to make that comment.
I just wanted to mention one more thing, was when they did the right-of-way purchase, and they had initially denied us commercial rezoning, the purchase price was an agricultural purchase price on the land, and they also told us there would be no access on the corner, egress or ingress, to come into that property. So I decided to sell them the remainder of that corner, because they took 90 feet on the one on Schumann, and they took 40 feet on 510, and then they had the corner cut or clip. So that remaining parcel was useless to me, which I ended up selling to them. Had they said there was a chance of being commercial, I would have never have sold that corner, for one, and I probably would have got more, or would have been more valuable for that land along Schumann, which they paid at an agricultural price. And that really ticks me off.
I bet.
Okay. Anybody else want to, the public hearing's still open. Looks like a couple more. Come on down. Hi, good evening.
I'm Tammy Vogel. I live at 7375 85th Street. And this concerns me because I have a little bit of property, and what surrounds my property is Liberty Park. And I want to see if you can answer my question from 66th Avenue west on the south side, how far does the frontage of 510, is it commercial? How far west?
It's got to be significant.
On the south side of 510 west of 66th Avenue, the entire Liberty Park, I guess your question is, how far west does the commercial part of Liberty Park go?
Correct.
Is that
How much frontage on 510 is commercial?
How far west does it go? I know it goes from 66 west.
I would guess it's probably on the area of about 1,000 feet, something like that.
It's
it's not that much. It's mostly concentrated up in the northeast corner. But if I can get your name, and I can give you an exact figure and scale it off on the
That's
plan.
quite a bit. That's almost a quarter of a mile.
Yeah.
That's a lot.
But there's a bunch of residential after that.
A bunch of residential, but 2,000 feet, that's almost a quarter of a mile.
Right. Well, I have property that lines 510.
But your point is, you're curious what that distance is, and that you were leading to a point about
Well,
that.
my point is that when I approached this council back in 2007, when I sold my property to the county, they said that it was not going to be commercial there. So now I'm thinking, how far are you guys going to take the zoning commercial west? I don't understand, where's it going to end? Is Liberty Park going to be able to have commercial all the way down the frontage of 510, all the way to the high school, or?
Mr. Chairman, it's a good question. I'll show here on the slide that Bob brought up. This is 66th Avenue and 510 here. This would be 70th which, the new Liberty Magnet School is over here.
And my property's the little white area right there.
Yeah, you're right here. Here,
Right.
this red building, that's the westernmost commercial building for Liberty Park. See, the red buildings here are commercial for Liberty Park. So there's really only one building that's kind of near 510 there, and the side of this building. So I think that's correct from the apps, which are right here. So their commercial is not even quite halfway to 70th
Okay,
to power.
so mine was grandfathered in agricultural,
Yes,
so
yours.
it will never be commercial.
Right, your parcel is zoned what it's zoned now, and what's surrounding it on the Liberty Park plan is literally a park, this green
Okay.
area here.
Okay, thank
What's
you.
the status of Liberty Park? Is there a status of Liberty Park?
Here he comes.
It's approved,
Oh,
and
Andrew's here.
and actually they have a number of years of, their approval's good till after 2020.
Is there any
to
start time,
commence.
though?
Well,
Sorry?
Andrew, yep, name and address.
2050 US Highway 1. Ms. Vogel, I'm happy to get with you after this. We were approved in what, 08? And
Yes.
2025 is when we expire, 17 years sunset provision. The red up there was the southwest corner. There's a commercial, 208,900 feet. It's been bounced around quite a bit tonight. We're in monitoring mode at this point. I think that was a articulate point that Mr. Ray made, and that is a tremendous burden infrastructure-wise for a project that size. But we're in monitoring mode at this point. But like I said,
Your point being that if the improvements were made, if the road and intersection improvements were made, that may very well have an impact on hastening the development of Liberty
Yeah.
Park.
it would probably help, yeah, and then maybe a little bit better of a market. Thanks.
Stan, how large is the Liberty Park commercial area?
You mean the acreage?
Yes.
I'm going to guess.
Did you say, Andrew, did you say like 208,000?
Yeah, 208,000 square feet of building area.
Okay.
If you look at the area.
It was 5 acres.
It's about 5 acres?
5 acres,
Is that
yeah.
fair, Andy?
But
5 acres?
Yeah.
It's more than that.
More than that?
Oh.
43, 5 acres.
It'd probably be 20 if you included the, all the way to the corner where the water feature is at the intersection.
Okay, still a public hearing. I think there was one more yeah. Thank you.
Mike Garfalo, 5550 42nd Terrace. I live in Vero Lago, and I think it's about 7 or 8 miles to the nearest gas station. I think Publix is about 5 miles from our location, and I see, this location at 66 being a good commercial location, and quite frankly, as difficult as the business environment is in the county, anybody that's willing to do anything right now, I think, you should really give them good consideration, and I'm in support of the project. Thank you.
Anybody else want to speak in public hearing? Did you want to wrap it up, Mr. Paladin, so we can close the public hearing and get to a vote here?
Quickly, to respond to the lady that spoke about she'd like to know more about what we're going to do, we'll make sure we get her name and number and invite her to the community meeting that we're planning on having before we go to the county commission. But what we foresee is a service retail center of some kind. We're not going to do any manufacturing. We're not going to do a cement plant. We're going to do like a dry cleaners, a laundry, a Subway, maybe a convenience store, 7-Eleven, something like that, pick and pack, maybe a small hardware store, something that's going to service the area. We're not looking to put something in there that's going to be a detriment to the community, and we're going to share that with the community before we bring a site plan forward or even before we go to the county commission. Unless anybody has any questions, I'm going to sit down and let you guys discuss this and vote.
Okay. So I'm going to close the public hearing. Last chance if anybody wants to speak. Okay, we're going to close the public hearings and let's talk this over.
Just one quick observation, and that is that the Wabasso area, commercial, they kept talking about blight, et cetera, and you wanted to add more commercial to that node. The question is, would Wabasso want to close their commercial and move that to the corner and have multifamily in that area? I mean, I don't know that that's possible, but you indicated there was a land swap that would be allowed. Could they move the commercial and give back residential to the area in Wabasso? I don't know who, I've forgotten, through the years, I've forgotten who owns it, so there's probably, it's a curiosity question from my standpoint. Last time I thought about that grove was Ms. Jackson, so it's been a long time on the corner out there. I'm not sure she's might be rolling over us thinking about all this. So.
I think the biggest problem you might have there, George, is if you got several landowners that own that particular node, probably getting them all to agree might be kind of difficult.
But that's part of what you're facing here, right, is exactly what you've heard by your neighbor. And the concern, this goes through anywhere, and you've heard about the hotels in the city, I'm not sympathetic or empathetic on the corner here at all. I think you're real close to what you're doing, but exactly what you've heard later is what's going to happen. It's almost like a spot zoning. Common sense, outside the box, or not, everybody, oh, my property's great, I want this to be this, or I want that to be that. That's the problem, or the good news, bad news with rules, and you know that as well
I
as
agree with you,
anybody.
George, and that's one of the things. We don't have 16 owners to really put together to do what we're telling you we're going to do. We have one owner.
I don't doubt that you've got it all together. You can tell all that you want, but zoning is zoning. There's no guarantees about what goes there. This is a very limited commercial type zoning anyway, so there's no real worry about manufacturing.
Absolutely, I agree with you.
But the fact is from all your descriptions, is what you're really talking about would be ideally is more of a swap than it is to creation of this particular node. So I think the one thing that has got to be happen for the people in Wabasso is this traffic, and Mike hit on it, Andrew talked about it, you've talked about it. I mean, the county, we need to get that area straightened out anyway.
Here.
Before nothing big can happen until they do, so.
Yeah, and let me just tell you, we have absolutely no impact fee money left up there. We've built County Road 512 phases 3 and 4. That took a bunch of money. This is an expensive project. Our total transportation capital improvements program has gone from $288 million in 07-08 to $157 million last year. You know, and we've got projects that are ongoing or in the mill, finishing up the final phase of Oslo Road, taking it to 58th. We're doing 66 south of State Road 60. 66 north of State Road 60.
We're not county commissioners, so we can't make it,
Yeah.
It's just the observation seems to be that this not getting done is a bottleneck to the good redevelopment of this area. I mean, I think that's what we're all kind of saying. I mean, it would be if we could prioritize things, I'm just opining here. I have no power to make it happen. It just seems like that's kind of been revealed in tonight's discussions.
And let me just tell you, we are bringing an amendment to the capital improvements element that we do every year to update the CIP, take out the last year, put in a new one. We're bringing that to the board on November 13th. And this project's still in years 4 and 5.
I kind of would like to weigh in a little bit. You know, the county attorney has given us a little bit of a latitude with the letter he wrote. And Mr. Schulke has kind of showed us that there's been a precedent set where this has been done in other parts of the county. There's going to be minimum 100-foot easement in between this project and the community behind it, which in the end result kind of does mirror a mixed-use project at the end of the day. You're going to have your commercial node, you're going to have your residential surrounding it. And I just don't see why this isn't something we shouldn't seriously consider.
I would just like to talk a little bit about the precedents set on the non-continuous nodes that was referenced by Mr. Schulke. Is that something that you can elaborate on?
Yeah. Well, what happened was there has never been an expansion of a node that was non-contiguous. What happens is planning's done in the real world. Mm-hmm. And when we did our plan, there were existing commercial uses out there, and that's what happened.
Okay.
The bottom line is this is creation of a new node.
Yeah.
It's not expansion of one. And it's not, Liberty Park is not a node. It was developed under the policy 18.2, which allows commercial and T&D projects. So it's not a node that can be expanded on. What has to be done is they need to change policy 1.25 if they want to do this. And if everyone agrees that policy 1.25, the 1.5 mile separation distance, if they want to change that, then they can come in and meet the criteria and get this. But I can tell you something. I kept hearing economic development, jobs, land use efficiency, jobs, housing balance, economic development. Those apply to every property in the county. Mm-hmm. Every property in the county. And you already heard that if this one gets approved, then the property to the west is coming in, and then we'll probably have the property to the west of that and the east of this. This is why you need criteria. This is why you need standards. And that's what we have put in here. And if they're not correct, we need to change them, but we need to apply the standards.
What I was wrestling with is exactly this thing. We've had this 1.5 mile come up before. Mm-hmm. In fact, it comes up more often than you might realize. But the reality is if this is in fact a new node, and ignoring the current node in Oslo, because it was really a surrounding of the property and whose bars on the west side, I can't, but everybody got grouped together. Mm-hmm. Is that if you're going to talk about this, you probably need to talk about both sides of the intersection. If you really want commercial here, then you're probably talking about a new node. And what you don't want to have happen, I don't think, even though Joe's got he's here first, he's got a great idea, he's got financing. I don't think what you want to have happen is you want 10 acres on the east side, and then the people next door to come in and they've got 10 or 30 acres there, and then, oh, wait a minute, the guy next to that, you start snowballing. If you really want to know, then decide what you want and say, I want 10 here and 20 there, or whatever. And that's the planning job, and that's the further, longer-term common sense approach. And the dilemma is how to get there. Let Joe build what he wants if we think it's a good idea.
I agree with what you're saying, but we also have market-driven strategies. And the fact is, it's just like Mr. Keating said. Years ago, everybody wanted to rezone commercial for residential because everybody wanted to build residential because they could make more money. The fact is, going back to what one gentleman said about the villages, I studied that. I talked to the owners. I spent some time out there because I was so impressed that they lived in a bubble out there when the rest of us were struggling. They were still closing 200 new units a month. Unbelievable. So I went back to the very beginning. How'd you do it? They started with they had a trailer park, and then they started buying land, and they put the services in, and they brought in retail, and they brought in things that people were attracted to, and that made the viable residential people, they wanted it more. So I know what you're saying, George, but we have services. If we keep going forward and create enough impact fee money and create enough tax base, and we go forward.
How do you avoid a commercial bubble?
You don't, George. Yeah. How do you avoid any kind of bubble? You try and stay ahead of it. But sitting here doing nothing is probably the worst thing you can do. You can't do nothing. Either you go forward and you lead, or you do nothing and you wait for somebody to try and lead you somewhere and then you follow. If you start going forward and keep our county taking in money and taking in tax base, you got a better chance of getting these road improvements done. You got a better chance of getting these improvements done on that intersection. You got a better chance of people coming in and opening stores and giving people jobs that they want and need. You got a better chance of our families staying here and not having to move away. This year's the first year ever that I can remember, looking back, however many years I look back in the textbooks, that we have less people, we have less kids in this county than we did last year. We need to do something to keep this thing going. Now, once we get this thing going, somebody's going to say, listen, this would be a great place for us to put some townhomes in. Geez, we've got all these services around here. They're just not going to keep building, retail when it's not filled, when it's not doing anything. You got to have financing to go forward. Right now, it says this is a great place in our location to put a retail services project. It doesn't mean every place is right. This place is right. We can't just sit here and say, okay, we're not going to do anything until something's proven. It doesn't work that way. Mr. Keating can plan all he wants. He's a genius. But when things change in our lifetime, like none of us have ever seen, including Mr. Keating and myself, we need to think out of the box and think on our feet and keep going forward and make things happen for our community. Now, if anybody can stand there and tell me that they don't think this intersection, this northeast corner intersection, isn't a good place for a commercial retail service project of some kind, I'll listen to you. But I don't think anybody can do that. So based on that, let's take the first step in going forward and doing the right thing. We need to work together to make this happen. I need your help.
Mr. Paladin, you're also saying that a mixed PD is not economically viable either in this location? A mixed PD is not economically viable in this location?
For two reasons. It's not viable, in my opinion, right now to me. One is, until we eat up our 3,000 lots that are developed out there that you can't give away, let me make that, I have some history here.
Yeah.
I was selling lots for $105,000 a piece. We always try to hold a few lots in all my subdivisions for my family's future. So yeah, if you ever need a little cash, we'll sell a couple lots and make a couple $100,000. Well, the last time I did that, I got 15 grand a lot. You understand? If you gave me the land, what it cost me to develop the land is more than what I can sell the lots for. So until all of that changes, until all that's ate up, until we get this inventory ate up, until all the foreclosures really hit the market, which you've got foreclosures out there that hadn't hit the market yet. Yeah. You can pretend you all know about them, you don't. The banks don't even know about them. We need to keep trying to move forward. And this is a good place for this commercial retail site. Approving this commercial retail site, we have to meet concurrency. We have to do whatever improvements we have to do to go forward in combination with other sites. And as each site comes forward, they have to do the same thing. We're not vested. We can't be vested until we pay our impact fees. So this is a good site. Please think about the site itself and not try and get confused in all the minutia that we had.
Let me ask you a question. They have said that conditional concurrency requires traffic improvements that are vastly more expensive than a 10-acre site could ever take on.
Correct.
I mean, $50 million worth of traffic, $100 million. I mean, a vast number. So when you talk about the economic impact to this county, I mean, if you're not doing it, which if you're not doing it, which you clearly are not going to be doing, you are basically at the mercy of this county. We have just been told that it's not even in there. They're going to re-up into year 4 and 5. So, I mean, how could you possibly even put shovels in the ground for this project in advance of these things being done, which we have been told is, 60 months away?
Because, number one, there's been impact fees that have been paid into the road widening and improvements in this area. By myself, $8 million. Let me make that clear.
When was that?
Oh, about 6 years ago.
I know, but that's my point. It's 6 years later, and it's not.
Let me finish my point. To your point. Number two.
And understand, I want that road improved like now, but
not doing anything and letting land go back into foreclosure and let everything be dead, you're not even stepping in the right direction. What thought process could you possibly have going in the right direction by saying, okay, stay there and die, we're not going to do anything? All you don't do anything until we can afford to build the road. How are you going to afford to build the road if you don't start going forward? How are you going to do that until you start going forward?
Okay, help me understand. What's the best case scenario for when you can put shovels in the ground, given that you have to do the 510, 512, you have to do the 510 US 1, you have to widen 510 to 4 lanes. What's the best case scenario for when you could develop this property, given that, most of which you don't really control?
Well, some of it we do control.
Some of it you do control.
Because if we go forward and we pay our impact fees, and we sign developers agreements or whatever we have to do to go forward, and then we become vested, then our people will put money into the buildings, and then our people, our lease stores and whatever, put money into the leases, and we'll go forward. But I can't go out and even do that. All I can do is get the funding to get the approvals to go forward to build the place. I can't go out and get people to come in and lease long-term leases and buy buildings and agree to buy buildings when you won't let me get the rezoning done. The first step to everything is doing this rezoning. You said yourself, I can't go forward until we put shovels in the ground. I can't go forward until we figure out a way to finance this. I'm a businessman. I'm going to figure out how to do it. I'm going to do it. Whether it's with this project and my other project and another project, we'll do it. But I can't do it until I get step 1. Step 1 is rezoning. Step 2 is getting my concurrency. Step 3 is this. Step 4 is that. I've been doing this for 40-some years. You got to start somewhere. I can't do nothing until you do my rezoning. I can't do nothing until you let me go forward. If you let me go forward, I'll be up here looking for site plan approval and what have you, and I'll be up here again looking for something else. But we need to start somewhere. I can't just sit on the sidelines and say, well, let's wait till somebody comes in with enough money that's going to develop the whole area. Who's that going to be? That's going to be some big out-of-town developer that you don't even know, that you can't talk to, that's going to do exactly what got us into this position. Centex, Lennar, coming here building 800 to 1,000 homes. Yeah. If you'd have kept doing what we did, we wouldn't be in this position. So you need to help us local guys stay here, and this will help me stay here.
And I just want to point out, if Mr. Paladin had applied for a text amendment to the comp plan when we talked about, he'd be well on his way. You know, the policy right now says you can't create a new node there. We know that there's interest on the other side of the intersection. There, you know, you're going to be faced with this every single
Do you think
meeting.
he has a strong argument for coming in and amending the text plan, or is this just a dark alley you're sending him down?
I can tell you, these days with the economic downturn, jobs and everything, it may very well pass. I mean, again, we're saying there's 209,000 square feet of commercial approved in the Southwest. You know, there's hundreds of thousands.
They have no intentions of going forward until they see something else happening.
Let me ask you, could that change be made just to the Wabasso corridor, or would it have to be countywide?
Well, we've got a policy that applies countywide. Yet they could make a specific policy change to that area.
The Wabasso corridor in relation to this particular thing.
They've done that before.
Yeah.
You know why we're losing jobs in this country, people? It's because we've got too many policies and too many regulations, and nobody can afford to stay in business or do business here. You got a guy here that's willing to put money where his mouth is, pay his impact fees, go forward like I have for several years, and keep things going. You need to help the guy, help the other guy, help the other guy to go forward. If you want to change a policy, change it. Policies, I mean, we change them all the time. We're going to change them back in 10 years. Maybe leave the policy where it is so Mr. Keating has something to say about everything that comes up here. That's okay with me. But we need to do what we need to do right now to keep the guys going forward. This is the only guy standing up here right now. Somebody else wants to stand up here? Look at his site. Look at what he proposes. Look what he says he's going to do. If it's worthwhile, weigh it out. If not, don't. This is a case-by-case situation, which Mr. Keating hates. I know that, but I don't care what he hates. The worst thing worse than that to me is going out of business. So case-by-case ain't the worst 3 words in the dictionary.
No, case-by-case is arbitrary. That's exactly. Case-by-case is actually what you should do, but each case you apply a set of criteria, a set of policies to that case. When you do case-by-case and you don't have criteria, you don't have standards, you don't have policies, then you're guaranteed to be arbitrary.
Honestly, you guys have both really forcefully argued it. I think we're repeating the same thing over again. You've both been really very good advocates for your position, very much so. So I think I've heard enough of the arguments. I mean, I think it's us up. I'm going to turn it over to my fellow commissioners.
What, out of curiosity, in the text plan change, what's required?
He just needs to submit a comp plan text amendment in one of the windows, January or July. We talked to him before the July window. He could have done it back then. And he just needs to...
The small could come in soon, anytime.
That's a land use amendment of less than 10 acres, not a text amendment. A text amendment has to be in one of the windows.
And a land use amendment on less than 10 acres doesn't work.
No, what he needs is he needs to change a policy. Right now, the policy says he can't do this. And the policy is applying to every other parcel in the county. You know, if you don't apply that policy...
Hang on, Jeff, sit down. New pace. In essence, if we approve this, then in our own fashion, in a backhanded way, we are telling you we want to change the policy. So if this is approved, you're going to have to go ahead with a policy amendment on the county's behalf in order to make it correct a problem.
No, but I'm saying the comp plan has a force of law. I'm saying that if you approve something that's against the comp plan, you're not consistent with the law.
What does our attorney say?
Thank you.
What Mr. Plackwood said was this, and this is the email to Joe Schulke. Specifically, you have asked if the policy absolutely barred an expansion that did not meet the 70% rule, or fall into the listed criteria for, quote, otherwise warranted, close quote. In effect, you want to know if you could argue that other circumstances, quote, warranted, close quote, an expansion, even if the circumstances did not meet any of the specifically listed criteria. My interpretation is that policy 1.24 does allow an applicant to make the argument. And that's what he's doing here tonight. He's making the argument that there are other circumstances other than what were listed in 1.24 that this board should consider in granting his rezoning application and his land use amendment.
But we're talking policy 1.25.
I was just reading what the email was.
Right, and the email is not on point to what we're discussing. What we're saying is policy 1.25 relates to creation of a node. We're saying this isn't an expansion because it's not adjacent to it. I'm just saying, you know, we get planner of the day office, we get people in there every day wanting to change property to commercial. Every day. And if we don't have policies to go by, what do we do? That's my point. That's why we're implying. That's why we're applying.
Without wearing out my welcome, which I know I have, George, but I specifically asked Alan if we could ask for a vote. Mr. Keating specifically told me he would instruct the county commissioners if it was illegal to vote on this and it was illegal for me to bring it forward. Mr. Polakowicz, after that conversation, sent me that email saying I could do this. You can vote on it.
Mm-hmm.
So the legality issue is off the table by your own county attorney. Even though me and Mr. Keating agree most of the time. But if we disagree, we need to go to the county attorney's office, who you pay to tell you what's legal. And he says I can ask for this, and he says you can vote on it.
I think it's as simple as this. What your position is that what you're asking for is not a violation. You interpret the future land use that it would not be a violation of that, and it's the staff's position that it is. And I think we're just going to have to up here make our own judgment about whether or not that is so. I mean, I think that's really what we're deciding tonight.
Thank you, sir.
All right. The dilemma is the email's 124 and he's talking about 125, which is a creation of a new node.
Yeah, but we're getting into the weeds a little bit.
No, you are and you aren't, because each one of those are a separate item on that comprehensive plan approval. Rules aside, Joe, that's the case. But your interpretation, I accept that we just say yes or no to the whole. So.
Now we making motions, we're still talking.
Well, I was going to make a motion, but you...
I'll make a motion to approve.
You're approving the denial?
No, I'm approving the application, not the denial. I'm approving the application for it to move forward.
Is that the right, are we going the right direction here?
As long as the motion is sufficiently clear that he is in favor of the rezoning and the comprehensive land use amendment.
I think we're clear on that.
So in effect, I mean, if we approve this is an arbitrary decision. While I agree with many of your points, and I wish you success, the reality as well is we need rules. And I think modification would be the best course for you in this situation. And I do appreciate your frustration in that, but the reality I also am worried about is the slippery slope it creates, as you indicated. And that is something that we need to be mindful of as well.
So we still have a motion? Anybody else want to speak to the motion?
Did you get a second?
Did we have a second?
We do
Mr.
not have a
Chairman?
second. We do not have a second. We're still on the original motion.
Need a second to continue discussion.
Did you discuss it?
Yes.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Okay, that motion is
fails
for lack of a second.
I'll make a motion to approve staff's recommendation and forward it to the county commission.
Is there a second?
Motion by Mr. Tripson is to approve staff's recommendation to deny the deny the rezoning and the land use amendment.
Correct.
Is there a second? It's got to be one or the other.
Well, I would
just please
go ahead, Sam. Do you have any comments? I think the reality is that I would second it with the condition that the best course of action here is, as Mr. Keating had recommended, which is to modify.
I'll include that in my motion.
Is it too late for you to table this? Or do you want to vote?
Mr. Chairman, wait a minute. The motion has been amended. Is there a second to the amended motion?
Well, let me answer his question before you
Is there?
do that.
Let's get a technical answer. Did anybody second the original the motion to follow staff's recommendation to deny this request? Is there a second to that?
Simple. Then that motion was amended. There was an offer made to amend the motion to include the amendment, to include the language.
Let's call that a failed motion and this a new motion. Is there a second on the new motion?
Let me ask Mr. Chairman Zimmerman, table it to what extent, sir? Table it for a time certain, or give me some help?
Okay, I'm going to think just kind of off the cuff. This is a half-baked idea, Mr. Paladin, but I think you can see that there are some reservations here that we have. I mean, this is a very difficult decision. You've been very persuasive, and I always look for a third way. Okay. And I don't know how that could possibly be. I'm sure the staff can't help but notice that we have some reservations about this, and usually you're pretty good at working out other types of solutions, and I'm just wondering... Well, no, you're a problem solver.
And that's
what a real estate developer is, a problem solver. And so I'm just, before there's a no that comes your way, I'm wondering if you'd like to have another crack at this one way or the other.
Yes.
So you want to table this?
I'd like to table this, get back with staff, see what the repercussions are of changing that rule, and it doesn't adversely affect the county in the future, and then I would consider working with staff and coming back to you with some kind of staff support. So yes, I'll go ahead and ask you to table it.
Okay.
So just that we're clear, that would come up in January.
Well, let's back up. Do you want to table this to a time certain? This is a public hearing, and if we table it to a time certain, we don't have to re-advertise. Correct?
Why don't you guys just tell us right now?
If they reopen the public hearing?
As far as let me answer the first question here. The question was, table it to a time certain. Will that give staff enough time to work with Mr. Paladin to be able to bring something back to the commission that you're hearing the...
I want it to run on the same timeline as the transportation budget.
You can't make it last too long. That's the only problem. To answer your question, Bob, you can table it to a time certain, but you cannot extend it out into the future without...
What are you looking for a time certain, Bob?
What do you need?
Well, I guess that depends on what the solution is going to be. I think it needs a comp plan amendment, so I don't think this issue can come back for months.
So he says the earliest it would be January, because his current position is that it would take a comp plan amendment. I don't think you want to be shorter than that. If you can convince him earlier than that, which I think you're more than aware.
I don't know if I can convince him earlier than that until I look into it and see if there's some way we can come to an agreement.
You want March, February, March?
Mr. Chairman, if it comes back as a comp plan amendment, it's going to have to be re-advertised anyway.
Oh, so there is no need for a time certain.
If the consensus of the board is to bring it back as a comp plan amendment and amend 125...
That is not our consensus. It's being tabled to look for all...
Mr. Zimmerman, why don't we just go ahead and table it, my recommendation. Go ahead and table this. If we have to re-advertise it, we'll re-advertise and come back when Bob and I are ready. That's when we'll come back.
If not, you don't want it tabled past December because you want to make the January deadline.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
That's
very
clear.
good.
That's
very
clear.
good.
Yes, sir.
There's the answer right there.
Yeah, so let's just table it and let us come back and re-advertise.
Thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you.
Okay. Maybe wisdom prevails. All right, so that is tabled, and that is the end of our agenda tonight, except for, you guys have any matters to speak with?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
I'm sorry, the public hearing is closed, but staff they're always available, and that's what they do, is take suggestions.
Mr. Zimmerman, do you want to take a quick vote on the table? I don't think you ever voted on it.
All in favor, can I have a motion on the table?
Motion to table?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any
Aye.
opposed? Okay, that's done.
Thank you.
Gentlemen.
Only matters, just looking forward, the next P&Z meeting is November 8th. We anticipate having an item for that meeting. And now it looks like we will also have an item for the December 13th Planning and Zoning Commission. Again, only meet once in November, November 8th, only meet once in December, December 13th.
Any commissioners' matters? Mr. Attorney, any matters for this evening?
No, sir.
We are adjourned.